Chapter 404. Lan Wuxin looked impressed as he said, Elder Yun's words hit the nail on the head. The first and third points are indeed not within our control, but it can't be helped. Where there's a will, there's a way. We have to try our best when there's a chance. As for Jun Moyan, since Elder Yun is familiar with him, you should know that Jun Moyan's hometown is Zio as well. No matter how deep one's relationship is, I believe that Jun Moyan won't act rashly because of his personal feelings when it concerns the survival of an entire nation. Our homeland lives on, we'll always think about it. It's the same for Elder Yun and Jun Moyan. Lan Wuxin's expression was indifferent. As for the fourth point, Elder Yun's assessment is correct. This plan isn't something that Zio can accomplish alone. The countless treasures used to set up the spiritual restraining formation are provided by others as well. However, this plan was something that this old man, Han Sanhe, Jiang Hanbing, and Qin Gujiang have discussed for a long time before coming up with a final plan. Although there are still loopholes in this plan, it's already the most perfect and targeted plan we have so far. We've thought about it for a long time, but we really can't think of a better way. Yunyang nodded, reciting in his heart, Han Sanhe, Jiang Hanbing, Qin Gujiang, Lan Wuxin. Han Sanhe was the marshal of Dongxuan's military, the leader of the martial world. Jiang Hanbing was the empire of Daiyuan's grand tutor, Qin Gujiang was the empire of Tianxi's top military man, and Lan Wuxin, who stood before him, was the empire of Zio's current chancellor, the head of the civil officials. Yun Yang's mind was suddenly enlightened as he was instantly enlightened. Why would Han Sanhe choose to send his troops at such a delicate moment? Perhaps the Four Seasons Tower's traitor's accusation was one of the factors, but this plan was the most important reason for Han Sanhe to send his troops. It could even be said that Han Sanhe's troops were part of the entire setup, complementing the trap here and working together. If the trap here worked, the morale of the other side would undoubtedly be boosted and the efficiency of the attack would increase exponentially. If the plan here failed, it would still divert a considerable amount of Supreme Cloud's attention. As long as he could not leave and rush to the east, it would still be beneficial for Han Sanhe's frontline. Putting aside the fact that there were people in this world who could be Han Sanhe's opponent? Perhaps in the hearts of the marshals of the four empires, the empire of Yutang was destined to be defeated in this war. They would either lose their last guardian or lose half of their empire. The only thing that Yunyang found strange was that it was the Four Seasons Tower who was qualified to provide the materials for this spiritual restraining formation. Furthermore, only the Four Seasons Tower knew how to set up such a spiritual restraining formation. However, was the Four Seasons Tower's grudge with Han Sanhe not irreconcilable? Could it be that there were some unforeseen events that caused the two sides to bury the hatchet? Thinking deeper, since the Four Seasons Tower had invested sufficient resources to participate in such a massive plan, there should be plenty of top-notch experts guarding this place. However, according to what Yunyang knew, the four venerable lords were still in Tiantang City, guarding Lei Dongtian with the intention of killing him. There was also a considerable amount of manpower wreaking havoc in the martial world, continuing to subdue the world by force. There was also another group of people guarding the school of spring and autumn all day long, confronting the concourse of the underworld's forces. If they could still spare the strength to send out strong soldiers here, how much more powerful would the Four Seasons Tower be to be able to support an all-out war on the continent? Could it be that the Four Seasons Tower's capability had never really been exposed? Could it be that the five venerable lords, Supreme Lord of Four Seasons, and Mr. Nian were only part of the Four Seasons Tower's capability and not all of it? Yunyang suddenly did not want to continue thinking about this. If he did, he might really lose the confidence to fight the Four Seasons Tower. Since you know that there's a loophole in the plan, think of a way to fix it. Take Supreme Cloud as an example. The information you have is too little, almost all of it is speculation. What's there to rely on? Yunyang said indifferently. Lan Wuxin shook his head. Elder Yun, How can we not know that only by gathering as much information as we can about the enemy can we truly grasp the situation? However, Supreme Cloud is extremely cautious. Since he's made his debut, he's never revealed his true identity and there's no trace of him at all. Even the information we got from the assassin this time was a coincidence. We couldn't do anything about it. Yunyang chuckled. Then let's start with the only clue. Actually, even if mystical qi surges into the dantian and goes against the flow, damaging the deific consciousness to the point where it can no longer be connected, it's not like there's no direction to follow. As long as the assassin's deific consciousness recovers, can't we search his soul again? Since the assassin is Supreme Blood's father, he must know a lot about Supreme Cloud. Since he's gone to such extremes and sacrificed himself, doesn't that prove that he must know a lot of Supreme Cloud's secrets? As long as we know all the information he knows, we'll have a good understanding of Supreme Cloud. It's not impossible to know Supreme Cloud's true identity directly. Then, we only need to target Supreme Cloud and get rid of him. We don't have to worry about finding the wrong person, and we won't have to kill the innocent. It seems like we can even save time. Isn't it perfect? Yunyang said leisurely. Lan Wuxin thought about it and said, of course it's wonderful if the method you mentioned can be carried out, but it said that even the gods can't cure the damage to the deific consciousness. Otherwise, why would we need to go through so much trouble? Yunyang chuckled coldly and said, heh, this sentence is not bad either. It makes sense, it does make sense. Lan Wuxin's eyes shone as he said, does Elder Yun have a way to gather the destroyed deific consciousness? Yunyang snorted and said, as long as the person isn't really dead and still has a breath, the soul will still be there. What kind of injury in this world can't be cured? Only a quack would say that there's no cure, that there's no cure. There's no solution. In this world, as long as a person is still alive, there's no such thing as an incurable illness. Take this old man's injuries for example, they're much more serious than the destruction of the deific consciousness, but I've still managed to hang on till now. Lan Wuxin was overjoyed. If Elder Yun is willing to help, that's great. Yunyang rolled his eyes and said, when did I say I'm going to help? Lan Wuxin was stunned. You've said so much that even I'm starting to wonder why you're so enthusiastic. Now you're saying that you don't actually plan to help? Why are you saying this if you're not going to help? Are you kidding me? Yunyang snorted and said, this old man doesn't care to be involved in such worldly affairs. I'm only saying it now to point out your mistakes and give you a reminder. Do you actually expect this old man to do it myself? Lan Wuxin had been through the ups and downs of the official world for so many years. His state of mind could be said to be deep and steady, but he was still embarrassed by the sudden turn of events. He could only feel his old face burning up, and he felt a little ashamed. He forced a chuckle and said, I've thought too much just now. It's already Zio's joy that Elder Yun is here. He thought to himself, these old fellows who've lived for who knows how many years are all eccentric and temperamental. You were seriously discussing with your father just now where the loopholes are, even giving feasible suggestions and ways to execute them. Now that it's over, you're going to turn a blind eye to it. You're really an old man who refuses to die. Yunyang thought about it and finally sighed, saying, this old man knows that Chancellor Lan is angry. What I did just now was indeed inappropriate, but this old man doesn't really want to watch from the sidelines. I want to, but I don't have the strength to do it myself. Lan Wuxin could not help being moved when he saw that the topic had come back to him. He asked, does Elder Yun have any difficulties? Yunyang kept quiet for a while. Lan Wuxin said earnestly, to be honest with Elder Yun, the two loopholes that Elder Yun mentioned just now can't be remedied. If Supreme Cloud is really captured and killed by us, everything will be fine. However, if he really escapes like the two loopholes, or if he doesn't come at all, the Empire of Zio will face the most terrifying and extreme vengeance from a specter-like presence. The spiritual restraining formation can be set up for a while, but it won't last long. When the formation is removed, the empire of Zio will be like a helpless lamb waiting to be slaughtered in the hands of Supreme Cloud. Supreme Cloud only needs to hide in the dark and unleash his various abilities to wreak havoc within the empire of Zio's territory. It'll be an immeasurable disaster for our people. The earth dragon flips, the water dragon roars, the fire dragon wreaks havoc, the wind, the clouds, the thunder and lightning. It can cause natural and man-made disasters everywhere. Elder Yun hasn't seen it with his own eyes, but the destructive power that the 9 Supremes can unleash with their nature attribute is simply too terrifying. Before this, when the empires fought for supremacy, it was still limited to dominating the battlefield and killing on the battlefield. There was no such bottomless design. That's why the 9 Supremes didn't launch their most proficient elemental attack on the Empire's cities. However, if Supreme Cloud doesn't die after this, I'm afraid that all sorts of destructive disasters and vengeance will come one after another. There'll be no end to the trouble and the consequences will be far-reaching. After all, although such an act is for the greater good of the nation, it's absolutely despicable when it comes to trivial matters. If Supreme Cloud doesn't die, an eye for an eye will be returned. When that time comes, the consequences will be far-reaching. Lan Wuxin said word by word, if Elder Yun has a way to solve this problem, you'll be the Buddha of the empire of Zio's hundreds of millions of people. Recommend a book. It's said to be written by Hua Manla's wife, Martial Dragon Saint Lord. Those who are interested can read it. Chapter 405. Yunyang frowned and said, "This old man thought that I've made it clear just now that I know the solution, but I really don't have the strength to do it now." Lan Wuxin said, "Why do you say that?" "From what I can see, Elder Yun's cultivation base is probably the cream of the crop even in the Four Seasons Tower, not too far behind Ling Xiaozue, the unrivaled expert." Yunyang chuckled humorlessly and said, "Then you're overestimating me. If my previous cultivation base was still present, I might be able to contend with Ling Xiaozue for 100 or 200 moves before being defeated. However, with my current cultivation base, I'm afraid I can't even make it to the top 10 in a place as terrifying as the Four Seasons Tower." Lan Wuxin asked earnestly, "Is it because of your injury?" Yunyang sighed. "If it weren't for the fact that this injury has reached a critical juncture and I have to find another way to suppress it, I'm afraid I wouldn't be willing to come to this worldly mess and add to my troubles. It's true that one doesn't want to be tainted by the worldly affairs, but the worldly affairs taints itself. What can I do about it?" Lan Wuxin said, "Just like what Elder Yun said just now, as long as a person is still breathing, there's no illness that can't be solved. There's always a solution to everything. The physician genius family's leader's son will be arriving tomorrow. There's no incurable illness in his hands." Yunyang snorted and said, "Isn't it more convenient to have him treat the assassin directly?" Lan Wuxin blushed. "He can't cure the symptoms of a shattered soul," Yunyang chuckled. Lan Wuxin was flushed from the expert's laughter. He did not feel that he had lost his composure in front of this senior who was hundreds of years old. After all, the latter was at least 7 to 8 times his age. "May I ask how Elder Yun's injury is?" Lan Wuxin asked humbly. "This injury of mine." Yunyang's eyes flashed with the vicissitudes of life, as he spoke in an unbearable manner, "After a great battle back then, I was left with this injury. I could only live in seclusion in the forest, relying on the earth's veins and the air of vitality of plants and mystical beasts to sustain my life. It has been more than 300 years now. In these 300 years, every 60 years, I need to use my family's bloodline to undergo a nirvana rebirth, so that I can return to my youth and slowly grow. However, there are great limitations to this nirvana rebirth technique. Every time I use it, I will lose a supreme level of cultivation. Up until now, it has already been 5 times. In other words, my current cultivation is less than 10% of my strength back then." Yunyang sighed, even though I know that as long as I make a move, I can let you know more information, but," he sighed softly and said, "I really have the heart but not the strength. I can only sigh helplessly." Lan Wuxin looked dejected. He had thought that Yun Yang's pretense was because he had a request, but he had purposely raised his value. He did not expect the truth to be like this. It was not that Yun Yang did not want to help, it was that he did not have the strength to do so. What else could he do? Yun Yang said tiredly, "This method isn't a secret that belongs to me alone. Not only do I know about it, but others do as well. The Four Seasons Tower is the only one who can do this. To set up such a formation, they'll definitely arrange for experts to oversee it. As long as they're from that era, they'll know how to do it. The result will be the same no matter who does it. Why must I do it myself?" Lan Wuxin said with a frown, "I see, but if they had a way, why would they wait until now? The Four Seasons Tower is targeting the 9 Supremes even more than the 4 Empires," Yun Yang said kindly. "Fool, if they don't know how, don't they still have me? Let them ask me. I'm powerless to do it, but can't I just tell them the method and the arcane art?" Lan Wuxin was enlightened. Elder Yun is right. I didn't think of it at first. In fact, it was not that Guan Lan had not thought of it. The arcane art to repair deific consciousness was a secret that was not to be passed on. If Yun Yang had not mentioned it himself, he would never have asked Yun Yang to teach the arcane art to others. Yun Yang said, "There's one more thing that must be made clear. The Four Seasons Tower's people must have a high cultivation base, at least an expert of 6th heaven and above. Only then can they do it." Looking at Lan Wuxin's confused expression, it was obvious that he only knew how many mountains there were. How would he know the difference between the 9 peaks and 9 heavens? Yun Yang could not help but laugh. "Just tell them. They'll understand." On the same night, Lan Wuxin had brought a Four Seasons Tower expert to ask for advice on how to repair a soul that had been destroyed beyond recognition. After Yun Yang's explanation, the expert frowned deeply, obviously unable to comprehend. He asked, "After the soul is destroyed, it's destroyed. How can it be gathered? And to restore it? If we do it this way, won't we have to pay with our lives? And we might not even succeed?" Yun Yang said angrily, "T. It's foolproof. How can we pay with our lives? If we have to pay with our lives, who created this method? Isn't this T? Just do it, I'll take responsibility for everything." The Four Seasons Tower expert thought about it and scratched his head, saying, "May I ask Elder Yun, when the soul is like silk, this converging method?" Yun Yang heaved a deep sigh. "Do I have to repeat myself?" The Four Seasons Tower expert's face was flushed. "Please enlighten me." Yun Yang dipped his finger into the tea and drew a picture on the table, saying, "Look, this is a person's destroyed soul, isn't it? It's a mess. Look, as long as you insert mystical qi and gather the deific consciousness, then forcefully comb it together, won't you get the deific consciousness's trait?" The Four Seasons Tower expert nodded, not fully understanding. Yun Yang said, "Everyone's deific consciousness is different. Everyone has their own trait. Do you understand this?" He nodded repeatedly. He would be an idiot if he still did not understand this. Comb a strand according to this trait. It shouldn't be difficult, right? His eyes widened, a little dumbfounded. Not difficult? How could it not be difficult? Comb a strand of the same trait, do you understand? He nodded. Then use this strand to roll a snowball. Rolling a snowball, do you understand? His eyes widened, dumbfounded. Yun Yang sighed deeply. He looked like he was about to lose his temper, but he held it in after some thought. He said, like this, reverse the deific consciousness, combine it from top to bottom, left to right. This is equivalent to the art of calming mind here, and then, do you understand? The Four Seasons Tower expert was dumbfounded. "I'm sorry." He felt ashamed as well. He understood every word the other person said, but when he put them together, he did not understand anything. It was too embarrassing. The other party had already patiently taught him twice. However, he could not do it. He did not understand it. It sounded feasible, but he could not do it when he tried to do it. He was speechless. Yunyang said helplessly, "The Four Seasons Tower should have records of this ancient legacy. It's not a long time, why don't you go back and ask? You don't know anything about it at all." The expert blushed in embarrassment. "I really don't remember any records." "Elder Yun, please, cough." "All right, I'll explain it again." Yunyang sighed. He could only start explaining again helplessly. This time, the Four Seasons Tower expert listened even more seriously. His ears were perked up as he listened attentively. However, he still did not understand after listening. Looking at Elder Yun sitting there drinking his tea with a blank expression, the Four Seasons Tower expert felt too ashamed to show his face. He almost wanted to hang himself. He looked at Yunyang with a pleading gaze, hoping that he would repeat it again. It was too King difficult. "All right, sigh." Yunyang heaved a long sigh, the kind of struggle that almost caused his intestines to fall out. From the side, Lan Wuxin and the rest looked at this expert differently. "Are you King stupid? You've taught it 5 times. Even my great-grandson, a 3-year-old child, can learn anything after 5 times of teaching. Yet you're staring at me with wide, perplexed eyes and asking to be taught again like an idiot. How did you cultivate to become an expert with this level of intelligence?" Yunyang looked like he was forcefully suppressing his anger, his chest heaving as he inhaled and exhaled to control his temper. Patiently and meticulously, he explained again. Seeing that the fellow was still dumbfounded, Yunyang finally flew into a rage. He pointed at the expert's nose and roared, "Has your King head been kicked by a donkey? Did it King come down when you were born? Tell me, is there anyone more stupid than you in this world? Are you toying with this old man?" He stood up and spat angrily, "Rotten wood cannot be carved." He turned and left in a huff. The Four Seasons Tower expert was ashamed, furious, and speechless. Wiping the spittle off his face, he almost wanted to strangle him. This old bastard is too much of a bully. Have you forgotten that the only strength among cultivators is based on one's fists? Even if you used to be amazing, you can't be any more now. You're only a beginner of the heaven realm and you dare to be arrogant in front of your father? Believe it or not, your father will kill you. No matter how the expert grumbled inwardly, even when his cultivation base was higher than the other parties, he knew that this old man before him was probably the god of wine, Feng Xianga. In the entire Four Seasons Tower, Mr. Nian was the only one who had seen him. This person's prestige was not only in the martial world, but in the entire human realm as well. He was even above the unrivaled Ling Xiaozue. How could he dare offend him? Especially when he could not comprehend the subtlety of the mystical arcane art. Feng Xianga had already explained it 5 times, if it were him, he would have been annoyed long ago. The responsibility was all on him. He was too stupid. What else did he want the other party to do after 5 times? No matter how reluctant he was, he could only bear with it. Sigh. Lan Wuxin heaved a long sigh as well. He really did not understand why this fellow did not get it. Even this old man understood it, how could he not? If this old man had such a cultivation base, would be able to work as well. Was this Four Seasons Tower expert an idiot? Or did this fellow not want to work at all? Chapter 406. Looking at the Prime Minister's distrustful gaze, the Four Seasons Tower's expert almost spat out a mouthful of blood. He walked out of the door in shame before cursing the old bastard a few times. In the small courtyard, the old forefather was still fuming as he cursed, "What's wrong with the children nowadays? Have they become stupid from practicing martial arts? It's just a mere art of soul reassembly. Judge the current situation based on the state of the divine senses wandering state, put it back together, restore it bit by bit, and it's done. It's such a trivial matter, King 5 times, and you're still asking so many questions with your eyes wide open like an idiot. Don't grow eyes to be filled with questions. Instead, they should be filled with understanding and realization. Don't grow brains to be tofu dregs. Instead, they should be thinking, pondering, and drawing inferences. A bunch of idiots, fools. The Four Seasons Tower's top experts? It's only a matter of time before the Four Seasons Tower is finished with a bunch of pigheads like this. This old man asserts right here and now that the Four Seasons Tower is full of such pigheads, its demise is inevitable. What are they, pig-headed things, experts, pft. Pft. The Four Seasons Tower's ninth heaven expert spat out a mouthful of blood and left without looking back. King Hell. Your father might die of anger if I were to listen to this any longer. Lan Wuxin looked conflicted as well. Elder Yun, this arcane art doesn't seem to be something ordinary people can learn. What should we do? Yun Yang was fuming. Those you've summoned are all pigheads. How can they possibly learn it? Look at this bastard, what else can he do other than glaring in confusion? He's worse than an idiot. Lan Wuxin felt like he had lost all his energy. But this is the Four Seasons Tower's one with the highest cultivation base here. The others can't even reach the sixth heaven standard, Yun Yang snorted. What does this have to do with this old man? Lan Wuxin was helpless. What should we do? Yun Yang was silent for a moment before he suddenly exploded in anger. What else can we do? When your physician genius family comes, if they have a way to help this old man recover a little, this old man can only end this matter with my own hands. By then, these pigheads must be here to watch. CK. They're a bunch of stupid pigs. I really don't know how Mr. Nian trained him to have me waste so much saliva on him. When the time comes, we'll line up and watch from the side. Let's see if we can learn it. Pig. Lan Wuxin wiped the sweat off his face. Sure, everyone had left. It was quiet, it was finally quiet. Yun Yang lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling listlessly. He had received too much information today. It was so much that Yun Yang felt that he could barely handle it. They were all heavy news, internal and external troubles, and strong enemies. The problems that he had to face were far more daunting and terrifying than he had imagined. Yun Yang even doubted if it was necessary to send such a huge team just to deal with a small cultivator like him. Aren't you overestimating me? After all, in the Four Seasons Tower's intelligence system, Yun Yang was Supreme Wind. The Supreme Wind who had previously appeared in front of others was during the incident with Yang Butao. Back then, Supreme Wind's cultivation base was only at the peak realm intermediate level, with the capability of a sixth peak at most. With such capability, he could have killed Yun Yang with a single blow from the Four Seasons Tower's known experts. Facing such a perilous situation, even someone as bold as Yun Yang still felt waves of lingering fear. After knowing that there was a trap here that specifically targeted and restrained him, Yun Yang had set up a preemptive trap. First, he had disguised himself as an otherworldly expert, and with Emmy's help, he had created an aura that was filled with vicissitudes and vicissitudes. As the saying went, one's gaze could not lie. However, Yun Yang's gaze was filled with the vicissitudes of time. Even when he was laughing or cursing, it was filled with the vicissitudes of life. Facing such a gaze, no one would doubt that he was actually a young man, no matter how young he looked. In addition to the encounter in the mystical beast forest, especially the aura of commanding hundreds of millions of mystical beasts and the earth-shattering cultivation base of an ordinary cultivator, no matter what, it had nothing to do with Supreme Wind or Supreme Cloud's information. Therefore, the Empire of Zio's higher-ups were convinced after a simple test. At the very least, they no longer suspected that Yun Yang was an enemy. A capable person with such vicissitudes and power who could command mystical beasts at will, perhaps even the Four Seasons Tower's Mr. Nian could not achieve such a feat without years and countless years of nurturing. How could one achieve such a miracle? And the wine that seemed to have inadvertently caused people to guess his identity. Taking advantage of the situation, he naturally shaped himself into a mysterious expert who could not be seen. His words and actions had made it clear that Zio was his homeland. Even if he only revealed a little bit of his patriotism, the effect was already more than enough. A man of Zio who had lived in seclusion for more than 300 years, casually producing a superb wine that was the best in the world, subduing all beasts, attuning himself to nature, the rebirth of a phoenix. All of these pointed to the legendary god of wine, Feng Xiang'e. Feng Xiang'e was a native of Zio who had lived in seclusion for a long time and had not appeared in the world for many years. That was why the head of Zio's civil officials, Chancellor Lan, such a cautious and intelligent existence, had firmly believed that this elder Yun was Feng Xiang'e. Rebirth. It was a mystical arcane art that only the phoenix bloodline of Feng Xiang'e's family possessed. Despite having guessed it, Chancellor Lan still addressed Yun Yang as Elder Yun. This was the way a smart person handled things, but it also brought Yun Yang more convenience. Elder Yun. Yun Yang liked this title very much. The fact that it came from Lan Wuxin was enough to prove that Yun Yang's plan was a great success. At least, it was flawless up until now. Even when his deific consciousness and spirit cultivation base had aroused suspicion, Yun Yang had insisted on not taking action, waiting for the other party to beg and plead. He had an attitude that said he did not care about success or failure and that it was all their business. No matter how earnestly he begged, he would not agree to it. He had only agreed to teach others to do it, further removing all suspicion from himself. Of course, who could be blamed if they could not learn it? It was the problem of their lack of vision and experience. What did it have to do with him? Even when it came down to it, Yun Yang could only do it himself, but he had to negotiate the terms first. If they did not treat him and heal his injuries, he would still not do it. Even if he did, he would suggest that someone was watching from the side. How could a spy do such a thing? However, Yun Yang had done it. It was as the saying went, a great traitor appears to be loyal, a great lie appears to be sincere. Yun Yang could be said to have infiltrated the empire of Zio's upper echelon perfectly. Even the current emperor of the empire of Zio was prepared to pay a visit to this Zio's old ancestor. Of course, it was not as if Yun Yang's identity was completely undetectable. Whether it was Mr. Nian or Jun Moyan, Yun Yang's deception might be exposed if either of them were to come by coincidence. The Four Seasons Tower's Mr. Nian was resourceful and had a higher cultivation base. Yun Yang was aware of this when he fought with Lei Dongtian previously. If Mr. Nian knew Feng Xiang'e or even had a relationship with him, Yun Yang would not be surprised. However, Mr. Nian should still be in Yutong. The distance was far. Even if he had heard news of Feng Xiang'e, he would need some time to rush over. As for the other person, Jun Moyan, he was from Zio as well. In terms of age, he was much younger than Feng Xiang'e, but Jun Moyan had already made his debut before Feng Xiang'e had gone into seclusion. It was possible that both of them knew each other. In spite of this, Jun Moyan had been silent for a long time. He might not come so coincidentally. Even if he did come, Yun Yang was not afraid. After all, Yun Yang still had Jun Moyan's medallion of gratitude. If both of them were to meet, it was hard to tell who Jun Moyan would help. What was more? You all think that I'm Feng Xiang'e, but I didn't say anything. From this perspective, there were still hidden concerns, but it was not a huge problem. That was all hypothetical though. If Jun Moyan came, it would indeed be a problem. Now, Yunyang could only pray that Jun Moyan would not come. Other than his own worries, Yunyang had another concern. Shangguan Lingxiu's ship was still 1,000 miles away from Zilong City. Lan Wuxin's plan was to capture Shangguan Lingxiu and the others in one fell swoop and annihilate them all. However, Yunyang was in Zilong City now. The manifestation powers that he was used to could not be used at all, so it was difficult for him to warn them with the usual methods. Yunyang frowned and wrote a letter. He then made it into a wax pellet and let Whitey Two keep it in its mouth. He could not go out, but it was not a problem for Whitey Two to go out. Go, send it over. Give it to that very handsome lady. So. Meow. Whitey Two shook its head and took the opportunity to ask for a ball of spiritual chi of vitality. Only then did it turn into a ray of light and disappear into the night. Yunyang heaved a sigh of relief. When Shangguan Lingxiu saw this letter, she should be able to recognize the severity of the situation and react in time. What happened next was entirely up to him. Yunyang was not surprised that Lan Wuxin and the others had deduced that the current supreme wind was actually supreme cloud. Just like what Lan Wuxin had said, even His Majesty the Emperor of Yutong and old Marshal Chiu would not believe that the person who had appeared was the real supreme wind. This was actually supreme cloud's thought. He must have known about it and understood it, but he had never said it out loud. The real supreme wind might be an expert in the battlefield, but he would never be able to do what he was doing now. The other point in Lan Wuxin's words made Yunyang feel a deeper sense of danger. This trap was actually set up by the Four Empires and the Four Seasons Tower. A trap that he had no choice but to come and enter was set up here while Han Sanha's army was pressuring the border to restrain him from afar. Yunyang felt that if he was not wrong, the other two empires would probably send their troops at this time as well. This would form a comprehensive plan against the Empire of Yutong, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Here, they were conspiring against the Nine Supremes while the other side was pressuring the border to divide Yutong's territory. Ever since Tai Zheng's wedding, the seemingly peaceful days were coming to an end. Yutong was about to face an unprecedented crisis. Oh, the cold winter. Yunyang sighed softly. Would the celestial phenomenon and timing be Yutong's only advantage? Shangguan Lingxiu, who was still on the ship on the river, was lost in her thoughts. The incident a few days ago had almost frightened her to death. The residents of Yun had collapsed in an instant, like a wasteland. There were still countless experts pressuring Tiantang City and dominating the residents of Yun. It was as if they were exterminating everything. Shangguan Lingxiu had just received the news from Zio and was about to depart with her men. However, for some reason, she had rushed over with her men. There was only one thought in her mind: she could only leave in peace after seeing Yunyang's safety. Finally, when she saw Yunyang return unscathed, Shangguan Lingxiu was completely relieved. After confirming that Yunyang was safe, Shangguan Lingxiu did not linger for even a moment longer. She turned to leave after taking one last look. This may be the last time I see you in this life. We shall never meet again, there's no need to be tied down. Shangguan Lingxiu stood at the bow of the ship and looked back, a faint smile on her face. Shangguan Lingxiu was prepared to succeed or die for this trip to Zio. She could not guarantee her own safety at all. Everything was left to fate, life and death were hard to predict. This time, she had ventured deep into the tiger's den to complete a mission that was almost impossible to complete. It was a slim chance of survival, perhaps even a slim chance of survival. However, she was a member of the Shangguan family of generals. The Shangguan family of generals would advance and never retreat. Where was justice? What was there to fear about life and death? Zio, Shangguan Lingxiu sucked in a long breath. Even if I'm destined to be buried here in this life, I want to shock the world with my death. Even though I'm a woman, the blood of Yutong's family of generals in my chest is much brighter than the others. General, we're still 750 miles away from Zilong City by water. Shangguan Lingxiu said faintly, full speed ahead. She looked at the two sides of the river and the endless mountain forest. Subconsciously, she felt as if her mind was drifting away. If one day, when the world was at peace and there were no more wars, how wonderful would it be for her to hide in such a forest with her sweetheart, no longer caring about worldly affairs? It was a pity that as a descendant of the Shangguan family of generals, it was already an extravagant hope to have such a thought. Even if she were to spend her entire lifetime, she would never have such a chance. Perhaps, the moment when she was buried in the battlefield would be her final destination in this life. The peace and happiness of an ordinary family's daughter was an extravagant hope that she could never hope to have in this lifetime. Everyone on the ship fell into a silent atmosphere. Everyone's eyes were fixed on a certain spot without any expression. These people were the Shangguan family's retainers, each of them a warrior who had been through hundreds of battles and bathed in blood. It could be said that any one of these people would be a living god of death, a textbook butcher. However, at this moment, all of them were gathered on this ship for the Shangguan family's long-cherished wish. Their expressions and gazes spoke of one thing: ever since they had stepped onto this ship, they had never thought of going back alive. Even if we are lucky enough to complete this mission, perhaps only 10 to 20% of these people can follow me back. Shangguan Lingxiu was dejected. It was then that, suddenly, a gust of wind came from the sky. "Be on guard!" A warning rang out. The entire ship was instantly filled with saber light. 8,000 people drew their sabers at the same time, but there was only the sound of a saber being unsheathed. It was so neat that it could stun the entire world. Within a breath's time, a saber formation had been formed. 8,000 long sabers shone brilliantly under the sun. Shangguan Lingxiu was suddenly filled with pride. This kind of warrior was definitely the top elite soldier of the entire continent. There was no doubt and no dispute. These 8,000 saber men were the Shangguan family of generals' last force. With these 8,000 people, Shangguan Lingxiu dared to step forward, no matter who the enemy was. Even if she were to face the world's unrivaled expert, Ling Xiaozue, she had the confidence to fight. 8,000 people were like one. Woo woo woo. An anxious whimper rang out in the air. Shangguan Lingxiu looked up and saw a huge snow-white leopard circling in the air, soaring in the air. A leopard that could fly? Shangguan Lingxiu's eyes almost popped out of their sockets at what she saw. Who in this world had ever seen a leopard that could fly? The Eclipse Panther was an extremely rare 9th-level mystical beast. There were only a few of them in the entire Tianxian continent. The former Venerable Lord Sword had never thought that there would be more than one Eclipse Panther, hence his carelessness. When the 4 Venerable Lords found out that there were actually 4 Eclipse Panthers, they were even more shocked. Therefore, it was not surprising that Shangguan Lingxiu did not know about the Eclipse Panther. It was just like how Yunyang thought that he had the ability to challenge the 4 Seasons Tower after his cultivation base had improved tremendously. However, when he found out the truth and the 4 Seasons Tower's terrifying strength, he was almost scared out of his wits. As far as Shangguan Lingxiu could see, the leopard was circling in the air, obviously possessing an extremely powerful ability. However, it had no desire to fight in the face of the fortified wall below, only whimpering. The whimper seemed to be filled with grievance. "We're friends, why do you have to do this to me? I'm only here to deliver a letter. Why do you have to kill me? Why are you so inhumane?" However, the people below obviously did not understand the leopard's whimpers. They were only focused on facing a formidable enemy. A leopard that could fly was definitely a legendary 9th-level mystical beast. It could even be higher. Otherwise, how could they not have even heard of this leopard's appearance? Everyone was well aware of the destructive power of a mystical beast of that level. It was absolutely terrifying. Looking at that huge body, those sharp claws that flashed with a cold light, and that big mouth that seemed like it was spitting blood. If it landed on the ship, it was afraid that just this leopard alone would be enough to make the ship into a mess. After a round of slaughter, he was still able to leave safely and escape unscathed. The 8,000 Saberman battle formation claimed to be fearless against all the strong in this world, but it was only a claim after all. It had never really fought against the pinnacle of strength, nor had it fought against top-notch mystical beasts with special abilities. The situation was not optimistic at all. As for the confidence to defeat the unrivaled expert in the world, one should always have a goal and a slogan, just in case they achieved it. Everyone was silent in the face of such imminent danger. Their grip on their sabers tightened as they stared at the leopard in the air. The leopard circled in the air, whimpering, its gaze on the ground growing more and more lost. Shangguan Lingxiu could even see an inexplicable childishness in the leopard's eyes. It did not seem to have grown up. Shangguan Lingxiu looked up and asked, "Leopard, what are you doing?" Whitey too whimpered happily when it saw that Shangguan Lingxiu was talking to it. "Awu. Awu. Awu, you want to come down? Awu, is there something you need from me?" The leopard stopped whimpering and nodded like a chick pecking at grains. "Disperse the saber formation," Shangguan Lingxiu ordered decisively. "Miss." The leader was a one-eyed saberman. He cried out anxiously, "Don't trust it so easily." Shangguan Lingxiu said, "A leopard coming alone obviously doesn't have any follow-up measures. How can it be a trap? Let it go and we can avoid a battle. It's worth it even if there's some risk." "Understood." The saber formation was withdrawn. Seeing that the crisis had been resolved, the white leopard in the air landed with a whoosh. Its massive body did not move at all when it landed on the third deck, as if it was lighter than a swallow. It shook its white fur gracefully when it landed and walked towards Shangguan Lingxiu. Shangguan Lingxiu could not help but feel nervous when she saw the white leopard walking towards her like a mountain. Despite having a plan in mind, she was not afraid. "White leopard, what is it that you're looking for me for?" Whitey too wagged its tail like a puppy and opened its mouth with a howl, revealing a large wax pellet hidden in its mouth. Whitey too lowered its head carefully and placed the pellet on the deck. It then pushed it forward with its paw and looked up at Shangguan Lingxiu. "Awu, this is for me?" Shangguan Lingxiu was dumbfounded by the scene before her. A leopard had descended from the sky and given her a wax pellet. A wax pellet? Could it be a piece of information? "Awu." The leopard nodded and sat down, panting heavily with its tongue hanging out. It was exhausted from flying back and forth in the air. Shangguan Lingxiu picked up the wax pellet doubtfully and crushed it. There was a piece of information filled with words inside. The moment Shangguan Lingxiu crushed the wax pellet, she no longer had any doubts about the source of the information. The moment she crushed the pellet, a gust of wind flew out of the pellet with a swoosh, whistling through the air. The first line of words on the piece of information indicated who the culprit was. "I am the wind." Shangguan Lingxiu was relieved when she understood the source of the information. She waved her hand at her concerned subordinates and said, "It's a letter from Lord Supreme Wind. It's definitely one of us." Everyone breathed a sigh of relief when they heard Shangguan Lingxiu's words, their tensed nerves relaxed immediately. Lord Supreme Wind was indeed omnipotent to be able to send such a top-notch mystical beast to deliver a letter. Chapter 407. The people of Yutong had always thought that the 9 Supremes Lords were omnipotent and omnipotent, but they would never have thought that this was a 9th-level mystical beast. Even if it was one of the 9 Supremes, how could he command such a high-level mystical beast? After reading the letter, Shangguan Lingxiu frowned slightly. After a moment of contemplation, she ordered decisively, "Stop the ship at once, drop the anchor, and wait here. We'll wait here to communicate with the Empire of Zio's people." "Yes." The sails were lowered. The ship slowly stopped moving until it was still on the water. Whitey too stood up and shook its fur, wagging its tail as it looked at Shangguan Lingxiu with a docile gaze. Whoa! Shangguan Lingxiu felt like she had fallen in love with this psychic leopard in a short amount of time. She asked reluctantly, "Little leopard, are you leaving now?" The subordinate beside her rolled his eyes. Little leopard? How was it little? That big guy could swallow 3 people in one gulp. The lady usually had good eyesight. Why did it seem like her vision was blurred now? Whoa, why don't you have something to eat before you leave? I have a lot of delicious meat here. Shangguan Lingxiu asked, "Can you rest here before you leave?" Whitey Two's eyes shone when it heard her. It looked at Shangguan Lingxiu hesitantly and turned to look at the road before lowering its head to look at its flat belly. Whoa, all right. Bring it here immediately. Not only will we provide you with your fill, we'll also provide you with enough to eat. Shangguan Lingxiu was overjoyed and ordered for a pile of meat to be brought over immediately. Whitey too was delighted to see its prey and began wolfing down the food. However, no matter how fast it ate, its movements were filled with a genuine elegance. Whitey too eventually sat on the ground with its legs crossed and opened its mouth wide, stuffing dozens of catties of meat into its mouth. It chewed twice before lowering its head to eat again. It ate until its stomach was round. Only then did it lift its head to look at the leftover meat in front of it and howled reluctantly. Its meaning was self-evident: "I'm full. I can't eat any more." Shangguan Lingxiu's eyes were already glazed over for a long time. What am I seeing? This leopard had eaten more than 600 kilograms of meat. My goodness! One meal was more than 600 jin of Xian beast meat. 1 jin of Xian beast meat cost at least 1 silver tael. To raise such a fellow, 3 meals a day would cost at least 1,800 taels. This was a super big eater. Who could afford to feed him? The well-fed leopard paced slowly on the deck, looking up at the sky. Shangguan Lingxiu knew that she could not make him stay any longer, so she could only wave goodbye reluctantly. Whitey too leaped into the air with a whoosh and cried out excitedly, "Meow, meow, meow." This shout immediately caused the people below to be thrown off their feet. My God! You're a leopard. It was a top-grade Xian beast. How could he make such a sound? It was simply a complete destruction of one's worldview and moral integrity. Whitey too seemed to have realized its mistake. This could easily expose its identity, right? Thus, he hurriedly tried to salvage the situation. He raised his head and howled, "Whoa, whoa." After shouting like this a few times, he left as fast as lightning. Shangguan Lingxiu stood on the deck in a daze, her mind still muddled. Meow, meow, meow. This sound. Why did it sound so familiar? Yunyang had a few cats in his house. That was probably how they called out. Those cats seemed to be white as well. Was this a coincidence? Wasn't it too much of a coincidence? Stop the ship at the lunar river and turn the bow of the ship. Approach the dense forest on one side. Be on guard day and night, be cautious in everything. This way, we can attack and retreat. Once we encounter danger, abandon the ship and go ashore. Retreat into the dense forest and disperse. Our priority is to stay alive. Even if we encounter the most perilous situation, do not enter Zilong City to hide. Zilong City is a trap, a death trap set specifically for us. Shangguan Lingxiu pinched the letter with a slight frown. Supreme Wind's letter had arrived. She had followed Supreme Wind's instructions and docked the ship at the entrance of the dense forest, hundreds of miles away from Zilong City. However, there was still quite a distance to their destination. How could they accomplish their goal this time? Shangguan Lingxiu had long planned for the trap on the other side. The other party had directly revealed their trump card of wanting to destroy their ancestors' remains. Their bottom line was already known: they were not going to be easy to deal with. However, Granduncle Wudi's remains had been left in Zhou for too many years. The Shengguan family of generals really wanted to welcome him home and bury him in the ancestral grave. Even when they knew that the other party was treacherous, they had still gone forward bravely, never to return. However, the current situation seemed to indicate that their goal could not be accomplished. At least, Shengguan Lingxiu had yet to think of a way to bring their ancestor back. What worried Shengguan Lingxiu more was that the other party would really destroy their ancestor's remains in a fit of rage when they saw that she had not entered the trap. Not only would both sides suffer, the Shengguan family of generals' long-cherished wish would be hard to fulfill. Let's see what the Empire of Zhou is up to. If it really doesn't work out, I'll only bring a few guards and sneak into Zilong City. I'll do my best to retrieve my ancestors' remains no matter what. Shengguan Lingxiu frowned and made up her mind. A few days after Yun Yang's arrival in Zilong City, the entire continent's situation suddenly changed drastically. The Empire of Yutong's Board of Military received numerous alerts, like snowflakes falling from the sky. Dongxuan's 600,000-strong army had officially departed in the midst of the heavy winter snow. They were only 1,500 miles away from Dongxuan's Fortress of Resilience. According to Dongxuan's Shadow Cavalry's estimation, the distance of 1,500 miles could be covered in less than 3 days. In addition, they could still maintain their full combat power. In other words, the war could break out in 3 days at the earliest. The rest of Dongxuan's troops would arrive in 8 days as well. The extreme war would begin in full force after 9 days at the latest. It was the middle of winter, and it was freezing cold and snowy. The attacking side would never delay the battle. Every additional day of delay was equivalent to driving their own warriors closer to the Grim Reaper. Naturally, their attacks would be as fast and as ferocious as they could be. It was foreseeable that the battle this time would be unprecedentedly extreme and tragic. Han Sanhe took command personally, mobilizing all the troops in the country. The Empire of Dongxian had already issued a conscription order. It was said that Dongxuan's emperor's promise to Han Sanhe for this war was, "Marshal, don't worry about the front line. I'll guard the rear and gather the rations and soldiers myself. The war this time will be in the middle of winter, the conditions are unprecedentedly tough. However, I promise here that not a single grain of rations will be missing. Not a single silver coin will be missing. Not a single military supply will be missing. There won't be any worries at all. The Tiger Talisman and Dragon Sword are in your hands. Marshal Han can handle everything as you wish. During the war, wherever the marshal is on the battlefield, it'll be as if I'm there personally. When you're at war, if there's any accusation in the imperial court, no matter the reason, it'll be dealt with as treason. The entire family will be executed, not even the fowls and dogs will be spared. When you're at war with Yutong, your 600,000-strong army will be the vanguard. I promise that the subsequent 3 million reinforcements will arrive in batches and rush into the battlefield as quickly as possible." Han Sanhe's answer was, this official would rather die in service of the country, swearing to create a great cause for your majesty. If this war fails, Han Sanhe can only die on the battlefield and repay it with his own life. In the nation of Dongxian, the call to unite the world for generations to come suddenly shook the imperial court, spreading to every corner of Dongxuan's territory. The war this time is the time to unite the world. Every man of Dongxian should wield his saber on the battlefield to earn fame, to lay the foundation of Dongxuan's eternal dominance and to shine for generations to come. 12 Transformations of Strategical Merit. With the merit, you'll rise to the top. All the men of Dongxian were fired up when they heard the announcement, their blood boiling as they eagerly signed up to enlist in the military. The empire's eternal dominance began today. A man's lifetime of fame, riches, and honor could be obtained immediately. Beheading one level would result in 1 transformation of military merit, beheading 3 levels would result in 3 transformations of military merit. Once the world was at peace, those who signed up could at least earn the rank of a county constable when it came to rewards. This was a solid official's position. Beheading 4 levels would allow one to become a military officer. Above 6 levels, one would be a deputy general, or a subordinate general. The division of military merit that was clearly stated this time was extremely detailed. Dongxuan's emperor made an oath to heaven during the war ceremony. This war is different from the rest. Anyone who has military merit, embezzlement, false report, or impersonation will be punished the same as a commoner even if the prince breaks the law. Once it's verified, the officials, secretaries, and those who participated will not be pardoned and their families will be executed. The entire nation of Dongxian was boiling with excitement in the face of such an imperial edict. When Han San had departed, Dongxuan's emperor sent him to the city gate in his military attire, pouring him fine wine and sending him off with a bow. When the emperor returns in triumph, I shall personally lead the civil and military officials to welcome you from 1,000 miles away, to congratulate you on your meritorious deed. As the explosive news spread, Yutong's imperial court was shaken as well. Chapter 408. Dongxuan's message was relayed back. Yutong's emperor and others felt like they had been slapped in the face as if they had heard a bolt from the blue. Dongxuan's emperor and his officials were at odds. Han Sanhe's meritorious deeds were enough to shock the emperor, and Han Sanhe's doomsday was near. All the rumors from before had been shattered into pieces by this fact. The truth had proven that everything had been a smokescreen that Dongxian had set up. The emperor had never intended to destroy his own empire and kill a good general. Perhaps it is true that his meritorious deeds are enough to shock the emperor, perhaps it is also true that the emperor and his officials are at odds. However, now that he is faced with the allure of an ancient empire, Dongxuan's emperor will still toss everything else aside and prioritize ensuring Han Sanhe's victory in this war. Qiu Jianhan heaved a long sigh, feeling the immense pressure. Actually, the scouts from both sides had already begun a brutal battle the moment Han Sanhe had set out for the war. In the vast expanse of mountains and rivers, the battles between the scouts were not inferior to the battles between thousands of soldiers. They were both extremely tragic. They fought in the dense forest, in the bushes, on the hilltops, and among the rocks. In order to obtain the enemy's information and keep it a secret, they risked their lives without a second thought. Even if it was a change in the topography of a hill or a patch of dense forest, Yutong scouts would destroy it immediately after Dongxuan's investigation. Tens of thousands of miles of land were covered in blood and the land was in shambles. The war between the two empires had yet to officially erupt, but the momentum that engulfed the world had already shaken the entire continent. Even martial artists from both sides of Yutong and Dongxian had joined in as well. Those who were worried about their homeland were never limited to those experts and hermits with profound cultivation bases that were far above the worldly affairs. Many of these hot-blooded men who were usually swift and unrestrained in the mountains and rivers had stepped into the battlefield without a second thought. They were even a step ahead of the army. Dongxuan's morale was high, feeling that the conquest had begun and that only Dongxian would reign supreme in this world. Yutong understood that it was a matter of life and death. The destruction of a nation and its people depended on this battle. This was an extreme battle of survival between two nations. A battle of honor between two countries. Why don't a man cross his sword and go straight for the waist of the enemy at the border? After spilling his blood for the country, he can then show off in Jianghu. This was an agreement between a saberman from Yutong and his enemy. Due to the grievances in the Jianghu, this sabersman's entire family of 19 had died in the hands of the enemy. The hatred between the two sides was absolutely irreconcilable. In fact, this hatred had been going on for 3 generations. No one knew how many people from both sides had died under each other's blades. The hatred had become deeper and deeper, and there was no room for reconciliation. However, When this white-haired bladesman heard that this battle concerned the fate of the nation and that it might lead to the destruction of the nation, he went alone to the place where his enemy lived to talk to him. Let's put aside our personal grudges before the vengeance of our nation. If you have the guts, let's go to the front lines. After the war, we'll count the heads of those who have contributed to the war. Whoever loses will slit his own throat and use this to settle the grudge between the two families. How about it? The sabresman was white-haired, but so was his enemy. Upon hearing this agreement, he agreed to it without hesitation. After this war, we'll drink with the heads of those who have contributed to the war. In the end, if there's no more to drink, we'll slit our own throats. If you die in battle, the 100-year grudge will be written off. If I die in battle, it'll be written off as well. All right. Countless martial artists swarmed into the smithy during this period of time. Make me a spear. I don't want it to be made of rare metals, as long as it's sharp and sturdy enough. Make me a long-handled machete, the most durable kind. Make me a pair of large hammers, they must be heavy enough. A sword is too short in the battlefield, it's hard to use it effectively. It can only protect one's life in times of danger. If we're talking about killing the enemy, long blades and spears are the best. Horses galloped on the roads of the Empire of Yutong. The martial artists on the horses were all dressed like military generals, wearing helmets and armors, holding long spears and large machetes in their hands. All of them were gathered in one direction. The fortress of resilience. Each of them wore a solemn expression, their bodies brimming with murderous intent. Their minds had yet to sink into the wilderness, their hearts were still filled with the desire to serve their country. Going to the east to fight, they would not let down their manhood. A great war was about to break out. However, the situation changed again at this time. It was developing in a direction that was even more disadvantageous to Yutong. War reports came from two other directions. The two reports came abruptly, without any prior warning, but the content was shocking enough to shake one to the core. The first report stated that the Empire of Dayuan had mobilized 500,000 soldiers and were heading straight for Yutong's southern border. The Emperor of Yutong had immediately summoned his officials to discuss countermeasures. Just as they were discussing, another report came. The Empire of Tianxi had mobilized 700,000 soldiers to invade the northern border. The jade scepter in His Majesty's hand was broken with a snap. His expression was grim, looking extremely grim. Under such circumstances, even if he wanted to feign calmness, he could no longer maintain his usual composure. However, this was not the end. A day later, a third report came. The Empire of Zhou was mobilizing its people, the military was reorganizing its troops as well, preparing to deploy its army to the western border. Currently, Zhou's army was already assembling. There were 300,000 soldiers gathered at the western front line while the follow-up troops were being deployed from all over the country, gathering swiftly. The flames of war had engulfed Yutong's entire sky. 4 countries were invading the border at the same time. Yutong was once again faced with such a terrible situation. In this cold winter, when the snow was falling, everyone felt a bone-chilling coldness. However, it was not the chill that came from the body, it was connected to the heart. It was as if their hearts were frozen as well. Dongxuan's front line. Fu Baogua had only said a few words throughout the entire process of gathering 250,000 soldiers and mobilizing them before the war. I, Fu Baogua, have decided to repay my country with my death. I would rather die than take a step back. I swear to live and die with Yutong, I will not rest until I die. I will stand here, on this battlefield. Anyone who sees me taking a step back can kill me. I would rather die than be a slave of a subjugated nation. Even if I die, I will be a ghost of Yutong. Fu Baogua's voice shook the heavens. I would rather die than be a slave of a subjugated nation. Even if I die, I will be a ghost of Yutong. We are willing to live and die with Marshall, we will not abandon you, we will live and die together. The 250,000 soldiers roared in unison, their faces flushed red. The 250,000 soldiers felt their blood boiling in their chests, almost bursting out from their veins. Their aura pierced the sky and shook the 9 heavens. At the northern border, Tai Zheng's imposing form stood before the army, as always. All the soldiers seemed to be filled with boundless confidence when they saw his towering form. I only said 4 words. Tai Zheng roared with his arms raised, F***ck them. Cries came from below, Marshal, you said 5 words. Tai Zheng was enraged. Who said that? Who said that? Come out. A burly man was shoved out amidst the roars of laughter. It was a squad leader with large limbs. He was chuckling, a little embarrassed. Tai Zheng said loudly, you said that I didn't say it well. You say it then. The squad leader was fidgeting while the crowd below cheered and hollered. The squad leader seemed to be unable to take it anymore. He finally stopped fidgeting and leaped onto the stage, howling into the sky, say it then. Marshall said 4 words, but it's actually 5. Your father will say a few words now as well. Actually, what's there to say? It's nothing more than a battle to the death. As long as there's a breath left, F***ck them. Below, hundreds of thousands of soldiers roared at the same time, F***ck them. Ha ha ha. For a moment, the morale of the northern troop was soaring. Those who heard it from the outside did not think that it was a vow for the final battle. Instead, it was more like a party. The tension before a great battle was nowhere to be seen. The empire of Yutong's west and south were similarly seething with fighting spirit. There was not the slightest hint of fear. Unlike the civil and military officials in the imperial court who were worried, the soldiers at the border were all brimming with fighting spirit. They were not discouraged by the impending arrival of the enemy's army. All of them were like enraged lions. All sorts of blood letters, oaths, and activities were carried out in this snowy and frigid atmosphere. All of them were drained of energy from the day's training. At night, they bit their fingers and racked their brains to write letters to their families, to write their wills. Those who were illiterate went around begging others with pen and paper, nodding and bowing with a fawning look on their faces. Those who did not know better would think that it was some sort of shameful seduction. The new recruits who had yet to be baptized by the flames of war gathered in groups and made a ruckus. Have you finished your will? I have. What about you? I've finished mine too. Let me have a look. Let's take a look and learn from each other. All right. Your writing isn't good, it's not literary. Look at mine, that's the real thing to learn from. Your writing is really good. Why don't you just write one for me? I don't know how to learn from others, quick, come and see. Ha ha ha, I'm dying of laughter. Zhang Erguz will says that after he dies, his wife will remarry and keep whatever she gets. It's so detailed and thoughtful, ha, a group of people gathered around. Let me see, let me see. Let me appreciate it. Read it, they passed it around one by one, bursting into laughter from time to time. Zhang Erguz's face was red as he jumped up and down to snatch it. Give it to me, give it to me. Can't you all be more serious? Go do what you need to do. Everyone deliberately avoided him, not letting him get close. By the time he managed to get close, the will had already been transferred elsewhere. Then, it was another round of trouble. F***ck, Li Xinyu is really cunning. In his will, he actually wrote that if he returns in triumph, he will marry his sister-in-law. Ha ha ha, he really has some ideas. What's that called again? What's the illusion of Goose Yellow Woman? What does it have to do with Goose Yellow? Let me see, let me see, let me see. It was a group of young men, each and every one of them full of energy. Writing a will was supposed to be the most solemn and serious thing, but at this moment, it had been turned into a foul atmosphere. Laughter shook the heavens. Only those veterans who had been through hundreds of battles and survived 100 deaths, each and every one of them stared at this group of laughing young men, their eyes filled with deep contemplation. A few words of emotion. Thinking of our country that has suffered many disasters, our nation. When foreign invaders invaded our borders, it was the most dangerous time for the Chinese nation, but it was also the time when the Chinese people were most united and trusted each other. Chapter 409. Suicide Note. Young lads, you have no idea what that letter and those 2 words represent. This meant that the moment this letter was opened after being pasted, it would mean the loss of a life. It will be a heart-wrenching pain. It will be a regret that can never be recovered. In the past, we also did the same thing and made a fuss. Back then, we mocked our comrades. Now, 70 to 80% of them are no longer in this world. However, those of us who survived have never forgotten the miserable scene when we represented our brothers and the army to deliver the suicide note and pension to our comrades' homes. It was as if the sky had collapsed. Everyone had read those suicide notes before they were pasted. At that time, they didn't feel anything. They only felt that it was interesting and funny. But, when they really opened it up and saw the familiar language again, they couldn't stop their tears no matter what. After experiencing this kind of thing once, he no longer had the intention to snatch anyone's will to read it. Because every suicide note was equivalent to stabbing a knife into their hearts. These young lads who are making a fuss now, you will soon know that today's laughter will bring you a lifetime of nostalgia and sadness. When these comrades used their bodies to block a saber for you and their heads to block an arrow for you, you would suddenly realize how rare and precious today's laughter was, how piercing it was, how unforgettable it was. Laugh and make a fuss, we won't interfere. Because this might be the last time in your lives that you'll be able to enjoy together with your brothers. If you miss today, you might never have such a joyous day again. There were also many new soldiers who were very dissatisfied with the veterans. Moreover, this dissatisfaction had been there for a long time. These old fellows had always been arrogant because they had fought in a few wars. They ignored them when they tried to get close to them with good intentions. It was simply outrageous. If you ignore us, we ignore you too. This dissatisfaction was only realized after they had fought in a few wars and became veterans. It turned out that the battlefield was so realistic. The behavior of the veterans was not without reason. It wasn't that they ignored you or didn't want to make friends, but they didn't dare to. Because, at any time, they faced separation of life and death. At any time, there could be psychological trauma again and again. After staying on the battlefield for too long, he really didn't want or dare to make friends. The only way to protect one's heart was to make oneself cold and aloof from strangers. All the countries were gearing up for battle, sharpening their spears and preparing for battle. They advanced like a forest, and their momentum was earth-shattering. Yutong's borders were brimming with fighting spirit as well, their chests brimming with blood. They were fearless in the face of the impending enemy. In spite of this, the imperial court of Yutong was solemn and overcast. During this time, His Majesty had blisters in his mouth. Old Marshal Qiu Jianhan did not sleep the entire night, his brows furrowed tightly. However, he could not share his worries with anyone else, not even His Majesty the Emperor. He was the only one in the world who knew that Supreme Wind, who could control the battlefield, was probably not in Yutong at the moment. I don't know where he went. That was the most fatal thing. Besides, it was not difficult to speculate from how the other countries had deployed their troops so openly that they might have used some kind of conspiracy to trap Supreme Wind. That was why they dared to send their troops to the border so brazenly, intending to end Yutong in one fell swoop. The old marshal felt suffocated by this conjecture, which was almost certain to be true. But if that was really the case, then it would really be a big deal. Where had Supreme Wind gone to at this critical juncture? Besides, it was impossible that Supreme Wind did not know about the invasion from the 4 countries. Yet, he had not returned to help. This was another suspicious point. Would this become an unsolved mystery? Deploy the spies from the 4 countries. Xiao Jianhan ordered directly, collect all abnormal information. Find the relevant clues at all costs and find Supreme Wind's current whereabouts. He paced to the window and looked at the bright moon in the sky, murmuring, "Hopefully, you can make it back in time. Otherwise, this war, Yutong's challenge, won't pass, no matter what." It was also in the early morning of this day. The Emperor of the Empire of Yutong, His Majesty Yupeza, had issued a national decree. Yutong doesn't owe anyone. Yutong has never been a channel for anyone to rise and gain wealth, nor is it a pretext or reason for others to unify the world and wage war. Previously, the generals of the 4 countries had requested to come to Yutong to attend the ceremony. For this, the 5 countries had signed a letter of credence for peace. The promise of no war before the new year is still fresh in our ears. Now, the 4 countries have gone back on their words and openly tore up the treaty. The letter of credence for peace is only a joke. There is no one who is despicable and shameless. Going back on one's words is even more despicable. Yutong has never been afraid of war. Yutong has never fallen. Promises, we abide by them. Dignity, we possess. Friends, we welcome them. War, we face them. Today, as the Emperor, I announce Yutong's declaration of war. All of Yutong's people shall go through the national crisis together. All of us shall fight the enemy until the very last moment. Be it man or woman, young or old, healthy or disabled, all have the duty to serve the country. As long as I don't die, the nation shall stand strong. As long as Yutong doesn't die, the nation's fate shall stand strong. As long as Yutong's people don't die, the nation's soul shall stand strong. With my fresh blood, forge my border. With my life, strengthen Yutong. The decree swiftly spread throughout the world of Yutong. The officials and messengers whipped their horses like they had gone mad, pasting the national decree everywhere. With my bones of steel, forge my border. With my life, strengthen Yutong. The slogan quickly became the most popular slogan among Yutong's people. There was no other. In every city, the conscription registration offices were packed with people. Countless youths and strong men lined up with unswerving determination on their faces. They had a look of duty-bound to never look back. Everyone was responsible for the rise and fall of the nation. With my life, strengthen Yutong. Outside the registration area, there was a circle of elderly people, women, and children. They watched their sons, their husbands, and their fathers walk forward resolutely, looking back 3 times with every step. They reported their names and received a number plate. Then, they were told where to go to report and participate in combat training. Then, they took the number plate and returned to their side with a determined look on their faces. The young wife looked at her husband, whom she had always thought to be a good-for-nothing, in a daze. Her husband was soft and gentle, never seeming to have a temper. Even if others were to go overboard, he would always accept it. He would never get angry with anyone and was unbelievably honest to his wife. At home, she was always the one who had the final say while her husband could only listen to her obediently. She had always thought that her husband did not have a manly spirit. Yes, he did not have it, not lacking it. He was not like other men who spoke in a loud voice, walked with a swagger, gulped down wine and gobbled up meat at the dining table, all in a dignified manner. However, when the nation was in danger, many of the men in the village were silent. Only her husband, who looked honest and weak, had signed up for the military for the first time without discussing with her. I have a mild temperament, I have never fought with anyone in my life. I have been apprenticed to a master and learned mystical skills when I was young, but I have never displayed it in front of others. I had planned to live my life like this. Peace is a blessing, harmony is a blessing. However, I must go when the nation is in danger this time. With my life, strengthen Yutong. The young woman's eyes were rimmed with tears. She suddenly realized that this husband whom she had scolded countless times was the greatest hero in her life. A true hero. She had never felt so safe before. Was the lack of security she had always felt in the past just an illusion? She saw her husband holding the number plate and walking over with the same gentle and calm expression as before. When he reached her side, he lowered his head as if he had done something wrong and murmured, "I hope you don't blame me. The rise and fall of the country, the enemies invade our borders, the country is in a precarious situation. I know you've always disliked me. When I go back, I'll write a letter of separation. If I don't come back," before he could finish his words, his young wife had already covered his mouth with her soft little hand and said gently, "Don't say any more. Since I've married into your family, I'm your man in life and your ghost in death. There should be a place for me in our ancestral grave. You can't go back on your word." His wife's gaze was unprecedentedly gentle and affectionate, filled with deep love. "I only know now that my man is a hero. Although I know it a little late, it's not too late after all, isn't it?" The man smiled innocently and scratched his head. "How am I a hero? People like the 9 Supremes Lords, Marshal Iron, Marshal Fu, and old Marshal Chiu are the real heroes. They are heroes, of course, but in my heart, you're the greatest hero." The wife held her husband's arm and walked back, her petite body almost burying itself into her husband's embrace. "When we go back, we'll consummate our marriage. I don't care about anything else, but you have to leave one behind to accompany me when you go to war." The young wife's face was already as red as charcoal. "I'll wait for you even in life. I'll wait for you even in death." When they returned to their village, the young wife held her head high, her face filled with pride and glory. At this moment, when she faced those women who often chatted together, often boasted about their husbands, and belittled their husbands as good-for-nothings, her face actually glowed like never before, and a sense of superiority emanated from her bones. She looked down upon everyone with disdain, and she looked down on everyone else. "My husband is a hero. My husband is not afraid of anything, but he will put it into action. My husband is a warrior who fights for the nation. Those in your family are just worthless wretches. Now that the nation is in danger, all of you have grown 7 to 8 feet tall, all of you have grown fat, all of you have wasted your strength. What's the point of being the king of your own village? If you're so capable, go to the battlefield and kill the invaders. Your own country is in danger, your own country is about to be invaded, but all of you are willing to be cowards. I despise all of you." Humph. These 2 chapters, I will not accept any comments that say the writing is weak. Chapter 4:10. It was a sleepless night with thousands of homes lit up. The men who were about to leave home to enlist in the army would only spend the last 3 nights at home starting from this night. 3 days later, they would enlist in the army. They would either head north or south, east or west. Each and every one of them was deeply focused on their own homes, their own families. They had never realized that this home was so warm, so adorable, and so reluctant to leave. The son who was usually mischievous and whom he wished he could hit 8 times a day was actually so adorable and lively. He wanted to watch him from afar as he continued to fool around. However, he could not. Once Yutong was gone, his home would be gone as well. There would be no more Yutong when the nation was destroyed. How could there be an unbroken egg when the nest was overturned? If the country that gave birth to them was conquered, who knew what kind of treatment they would be subjected to? How could those wolf-like invaders leave a path of survival for their own family members? It was better to be a dog in times of peace than to be a slave of a subjugated nation. These words spoke of the hardships of the people, the heartfelt wishes of the people. Thousands of families, silent wine tables. People who drank silently. Drink this cup of wine. Good. Do well when you go. Don't embarrass the people at home. Good. Everything is fine at home. Yes. If. The old father lowered his head, his pale hair quivering under the light. His face was hidden in the darkness where the light could not reach as he said in a hoarse voice, "If that moment comes, don't forget that Yutong's blood flows in your bones. We're going to fight with our lives, not to surrender. Don't worry, father. I'm not a coward." Good. 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 The old man drank half of his wine and stood up. He wanted to say something but he swallowed it and said in a hoarse voice, "Have a good talk with your wife. Tell her that our family awaits your return. If you don't come back, we'll raise you like a daughter. In the future, we'll buy you a dowry." Yes. Thousands of homes lit up the sleepless night. They departed for the battlefield in the morning. Yutong was filled with the fragrance of wine. Countless elders knelt in front of their ancestors' graves, holding candles and paper money in loneliness, tears streaming down their faces. "I hope that the spirits of our ancestors can bless our children's safe return." Candles and incense flickered in front of countless graves throughout Yutong. On the other side, Yunyang finally met the legendary descendant of the physician genius family, Sun Chengfeng. Chancellor Lan stood by the side, watching Sun Chengfeng take Elder Yun's pulse with a nervous expression. Elder Yun's current position was special. If he couldn't be cured, then he could only continue with the original flawed plan. If Supreme Cloud was not executed, the Empire of Zio would be in for a good time from now on. Even if Yutong was annihilated, the Empire of Zio, as the main perpetrator of this plot, would have to face Supreme Cloud's most direct and extreme revenge. It would be unbearable. What was more, could the Empire of Zio escape the covetous eyes of other empires as it suffered from the continuous man-made disasters? It was a terrifying outcome that could wipe out the entire Empire of Zio's regime. Thinking deeper, if Supreme Cloud had really gathered all the powers of the Nine Supremes manifestation, the entire Empire of Zio would be reduced to a nation of swamps if he only directed the lunar river's water to pour in. How many people would be left alive then? What a strange pulse. Sun Chengfeng frowned, his fingers on Elder Yun's wrist stuck. Strange, Chancellor Lan asked anxiously, "What is it?" "This. Elder Yun's pulse should have been severed a long time ago. However, there's still a strand of life force in his meridians. In other words, this Elder Yun, cough cough, forgive me for being blunt, should be someone who died a long time ago. However, for some reason, he's not dead and is still alive until now." Yun Yang praised, "Miracle Physician Sun's mastery of the pulse is indeed remarkable. It's no less than your ancestors. You're very accurate. For Elder Yun to be able to live until now, not only is it commendable, it's also something that others can't do. However, even if Elder Yun can slow down his injuries every time he flips, it will still damage too much of his life force and his cultivation base." Sun Chengfeng said, "At this time, today, now. I believe Elder Yun should understand that there is no more room for squandering next time." Yun Yang heaved a long sigh. That's right. These two words were filled with a heavy and dignified feeling. Chancellor Lan sighed as well. Miracle Physician Sun's diagnosis had once again proven that what Elder Yun had said was true. At the same time, it had also proven that his own guess was true. What was the use of proving it now? The key was that he had to be able to cure him. Only when Elder Yun's condition improved could they proceed to the next step. Chancellor Lan asked anxiously, does Miracle Physician Sun have any ideas? Miracle Physician Sun frowned. It's difficult, Prime Minister Lan's heart turned cold. Is there really no way to even try? Sun Qingfeng was silent for a while before he said, Elder Yun is experienced and knowledgeable, and has been entangled with this illness for countless years. I believe that your knowledge of this injury far surpasses mine. I wonder if Elder Yun knows how to treat it. Or perhaps the direction of treatment. Yun Yang sighed softly and said, actually, this old man has an idea of the direction of treatment and how to proceed. I even know the specific prescription. The problem is that it's as difficult as ascending to heaven to gather all the herbs. Chancellor Lan perked up and said, as long as there's a way, there's hope. I wonder what herbs Elder Yun's prescription requires. Yun Yang said faintly, the bitterness of the flood dragon's gallbladder, the frost of the peacock's tail, the sweetness of the rootless water, the sourness of the snow mountain pomegranate, the spiciness of the unicorn's horn, the saltiness of the boundless whale's blood. In addition, the heart of the fallen star and the most difficult medicinal primer, which requires the people's willpower to condense into a pill. Only then will there be hope. Chancellor Lan was dumbfounded, as if he was listening to the Bible. Sun Qingfeng thought about it and said, may I ask who gave you this prescription? I've never heard of it before. Yun Yang gave him a sideways glance. For the first time, his nonchalance was gone as he said in surprise, you don't know? This is the prescription given to me by your ancestor, Sun Damao. Sun Qingfeng's face immediately turned red, but not because of anger, but because of shame and an indescribable sense of glory. So it's the ancestor. Ahem, ancestor. Damao is just a nickname for my friends, the ancestor's name is Sun Jishir. Yun Yang snorted, I'll call him Sun Damao, what about it? That bastard, he disappeared after giving me the prescription. Is he still alive now? Sun Qingfeng's expression grew more respectful. My ancestor has passed away 270 years ago. Yun Yang rolled his eyes, a tinge of sadness appearing on his face before he said indifferently, I didn't expect that, after he gave me the prescription, he actually left me alone and died in secret. How preposterous. Although he was saying outrageous, the expression on his face was one of melancholy and nostalgia. He then said slowly, back then, your grandfather was a good man, his sigh was clearly expressed in his words. Sun Qingfeng said respectfully, since Senior and my ancestor are old acquaintances, Yun Yang chuckled and said, what old acquaintance? Your ancestor is my sworn little brother, he's my third. This old man is the eldest. Sun Qingfeng was shocked. Senior, you're the god of wine who terrorized the world back then? Yun Yang snorted, what god of wine? Why don't I remember such a lame nickname? Sun Qingfeng stood up respectfully, tidied up his clothes, and knelt on the ground. Qingfeng of the Sun clan greets the great master. May great old lord be blessed, this grandson is inexplicably excited. I hereby apologize for all the impoliteness I've shown previously. Please forgive me, great old lord. Although Lan Wuxin had some guesses about Elder Yun's true identity, he had yet to confirm it, especially since Elder Yun had not revealed his identity himself. Even if he could basically pinpoint the identity, he dared not say it out loud. Naturally, he did not inform Sun Qingfeng. Therefore, Sun Qingfeng really did not know who he was going to treat before he arrived. When he checked the pulse, Sun Qingfeng was shocked. Just by looking at the pulse, the person before him was like an old man who had been dead for many years. The pulse was too strange. However, since the other party was an expert and had already stated that he was suffering from a dangerous injury, why else would he look for a miracle physician like Yun Yang? It made sense. However, how did the other party become his old ancestor? However, the other party was his old ancestor's sworn brother and was the eldest. His old ancestor was the other party's younger brother. Was that not his great old lord? Chancellor Lan, who was accompanying him, was dumbfounded as well. Damn it! What kind of relationship is this? Isn't it a little too complicated? We haven't even done anything yet and you're already acknowledging each other? One of you has become another's old ancestor. Can't you be more childish? If you're so amazing, why don't you ascend to heaven? No, that's not right. With his cultivation base and seniority, ascending to heaven is just a matter of thinking about it. He is just that amazing. Even though he was enlightened, Chancellor Lan's expression was still a little twisted. He and Sun Qingfeng were childhood friends, they had known each other since they were young, they had even addressed each other as brothers. Did this not mean that this fellow had become his great old lord as well? How could Chancellor Lan not feel conflicted at the thought? Who was he? He was the head of the Empire of Zio's officials, the ancestor of the civil officials, he was someone to be respected no matter who he was. However, in front of this old man, he had been demoted to the level of a grandson. Looking at the white-haired Sun Qingfeng respectfully addressing him as Old Lord and Great Old Lord while kneeling on the ground, filled with admiration, Chancellor Lan's heart was a mess. Should he join in the fun and address him as Old Lord and Great Old Lord as well? Thinking about it, Lan Wuxin shuddered, he really did not want to think about it any further. Get up. You're already so old. As long as the intention is there, it's fine. Is there a need to be so serious? Dumao was like this back in the day, polite and considerate in everything. Yun Yang said kindly inside, still, a good person will be rewarded. The physician genius family has healed the world, the bloodline is unbroken, there's a successor. Today is a tragic day. When I was writing, I slipped my foot and the thermos bottle toppled over and broke, spilling hot water all over the floor. It's nothing much, but my wife's 3 little lanterns were charging not far away. With a pop, there was a burnt smell. One went out, pop, another went out, and when I rushed over, the third one went out as well. Green smoke curled and the burnt smell lingered. Chapter 411. Elder Master, you are still strong and healthy. You are a true transcendent being, an immortal from the heavens. How can a toiling person like me compare to you? To be able to see Elder Master's golden face today is truly a great joy and a great fortune. Sun Qingfeng said respectfully. Child, just remember to call me Elder Yun from now on. Don't pay your respects anymore, like a kowtowing bug. This old man doesn't like it. A man should stand tall, save the world and the people. You must have your own confidence when facing anyone. There's no need to kneel, Yun Yang said hoarsely. I will solemnly obey ancestors' teachings. Sun Qingfeng respectfully kowtowed once more before standing up. Yun Yang said faintly, as for this old man, I'm no immortal from heaven. I'm only an old man who's struggling at death's door now. It's a relief to be able to see an old friend today. If I hadn't heard that a descendant of the physician genius family was here that day in the forest, I might not have come out. It's all fate, it's predestined. He sighed slowly, his eyes seeming to drift away as he said, of the old brothers back then, there's only this old man left now. This mortal realm is filled with loneliness. Old forefather can definitely attain immortality and become a true immortal of the land. Sun Qingfeng said respectfully, for the next hundreds and thousands of years, our descendants and families still hope to receive old forefathers' blessing. Becoming a true immortal of the land is easier said than done. Now that I've come out to see my homeland again, especially after seeing my old friends, I've fulfilled my wish. With my injuries, I'll return to the earth in less than 10 years. Actually, that's not a bad thing. I can reunite with them again and drink with them. They've been waiting for me for too long. Sun Qingfeng said anxiously, didn't old forefather collect these medicinal herbs all these years? Sun Qingfeng was genuinely anxious at this moment, there was not a hint of pretense. An old forefather like Feng Xianga was like a living fossil in his family. He did not even need to exert himself. Just being alive was a symbol of his spirit. It was best for such an old lord to live on as long as he could. Lan Wuxin looked anxious as well. Originally, it did not matter whether old Yun was saved or not. It was good to get a big favor from saving him, but it did not matter if he could not be saved. But now, the situation was very different. The reconstruction of the divine soul was still waiting for this great master. He was the only one who could perfect a flawed setup. Even if others had the same cultivation, they wouldn't be able to learn or use it. Other than that, Lan Wuxin was genuinely impressed. He was indeed an ancestor-level existence. He knew a method that no one else knew. Those experts who were like earth immortals in his eyes were like children in open-crotch pants in front of the great ancestor. They didn't know anything. The ancestors were truly knowledgeable, but it's a pity that the younger generation didn't live up to expectations. Not even a tenth of the abilities of the ancestors have been passed down. It's truly regrettable. Lan Wuxin's words came from the bottom of his heart, not just to flatter old Yun. Recalling how the so-called Four Seasons Towers experts were like idiots in front of the great ancestor yesterday, with dumbfounded expressions and dumbfounded gazes, he could not help sighing again. At this moment, he deeply felt that the Four Seasons Tower did not live up to its name. The legendary top organization of the continent? Each of them was like a pig's brain. They had an incredible cultivation base, but they didn't have the corresponding experience to distinguish between knowledge and understanding. It was no wonder that one of the 9 Supremes had managed to escape when they had set up a fatal trap to ambush them. A bunch of idiots, a bunch of idiots. They couldn't do anything right, but they were good at spoiling things. It's hard to say. Although these people from the Four Seasons Tower don't understand this old man's method, they're probably limited by their knowledge and experience. Cultivators have always prioritized their own cultivation base. I believe there must be other experts in this world who know about it. There might even be seniors and experts who are older than this old man. They might not be a minority. This old man is ashamed to be called Great Old Lord at such a young age. Yun Yang shook his head, sighing. Sun Qingfeng could not hold it in and asked anxiously, "May I ask, great ancestor, what materials do you lack? This grandson will think of a way to get them now." You've said it yourself, the physician genius family has practiced medicine to help the people, the good karma we've accumulated. Yun Yang kept quiet for a moment and said, "I've hunted the flood dragon's gallbladder from the borderless sea. I've also obtained the peacock's tail from the supreme mountain. The rootless water is even easier to obtain. I've already harvested it after so many years. I've also found the snow mountain pomegranate 200 years ago. The unicorn's horn has to be willingly given by the unicorn before it can be used as medicine. It took me 100 years, but it still ended up in my hands. As for the measureless whale, it took me a full 60 years to get it from a sleeping whale. I've collected most of the required medicinal herbs, so I should be working harder. However, when I tried to focus on the orb of volition of the people, I felt that the orb wasn't something that could be easily made. It required a huge amount of manpower, resources, and financial resources, as well as a tight setup. Not only that, there's also the heart of siderite. No one has ever heard of something like it in these hundreds of years. I've tried my best and flipped through many ancient books, but it seems like I haven't heard of it in the past tens of thousands of years. How am I going to search for medicinal herbs without a target? How can I not despair? How can I not give up? Sun Qingfeng's face was filled with despair when he heard Yun Yang's words. He said, "Only after listening to elder ancestors' words do I know that elder ancestors' long years of seclusion in the secular world have such exciting experiences. Just the first few items alone are enough to make this junior tremble and wish for them to be impossible, yet elder ancestor can actually obtain them one by one. You truly live up to your reputation. I wonder, How do I obtain the orb of volition of the people? How should I proceed with the arrangement of a huge amount of manpower, resources, and financial resources? Also, what is the heart of Siddharite? Please enlighten me, elder ancestor. As he spoke, he raised his hand and gave himself a tight slap. He was truly ignorant and inexperienced. As the physician genius's heir, he had actually never heard of most of the rare spiritual herbs and spiritual ingredients in this prescription written by his ancestor. He did not even understand the principles of pathology, pharmacology, and medicine at all. He deeply felt the gap between himself and elder ancestor. It was as wide as heaven and earth. How could his mere cultivation base be worthy of the title of physician genius? The unrivaled divine physician in the world, and so on, had really made him stagnate and did not seek to improve. Yunyang said faintly, "This old man did not make it clear just now. The orb of volition of the people only requires manpower, resources, and financial resources, and can be obtained according to the time. However, the heart of Siddharite is the difficult part. May I ask, elder ancestor, what does the orb of volition of the people refer to? Since it requires manpower, resources, and financial resources to set it up, this junior can be of help in this aspect." Sun Chengfeng asked humbly. Actually, there are 3 ways to form the orb of volition of the people. Each has its own path, but they all have the same root and the end is the same. One is to create good karma and gain the admiration of the people, to be worshipped as a living Buddha and naturally obtain the people's volition. This way, the quality of the orb is the best, but the duration of this method is also the longest. Secondly, this old man wants to use a large amount of manpower, resources, and financial resources to create opportunities to bewitch the people's wisdom and collect the people's volition. The duration of this method is relatively short, but the quality of the orb is flawed. It's not made by nature after all. However, this old man is only seeking to cure the illness, and what I'm doing is beneficial to the person involved as well, so I'm not acting rashly. As for the third method, let's not talk about it. Lan Wuxin and Sun Chengfeng were both surprised. Sun Chengfeng asked in confusion, "Why did elder ancestor leave things unsaid? What is the third method?" Lan Wuxin said, "From the 3 methods that Elder Yun has mentioned, the third method should be the most effective and the duration should be the shortest as well. As the saying goes, one must act according to the urgency of the matter. Even if there are things that one shouldn't do, one can still reconsider." Yunyang shook his head and said in a low voice, "The orb of volition of the people can be said to be lofty and majestic, but it's basically what one's heart desires." Lan Wuxin was immediately alerted, vaguely guessing what the third method that Yunyang was unwilling to mention was. Yunyang paused for a bit before saying, "To an individual, the people's heart desires are beyond the pale, but to the royalty, it's not a big deal. You only need to retrieve a country's emperor's imperial seal. It's already condensed with countless people's volition. You only need to use a special technique to extract the volition and condense the orb." Lan Wuxin said, "That's easy. His Majesty knows that Elder Yun is coming and has long intended to pay a visit. To His Majesty, it's not a problem to ask for the imperial seal to use the people's volition." Yunyang sighed softly. "Chancellor Lan, you may not know this, but this old man's injuries are severe. The volition that I need to use is not a small amount. I'll need to use at least 10% of the volition condensed in the imperial seal. The volition of the imperial seal is the people's heart. How can this old man destroy the country's destiny for my own selfish reasons?" Lan Wuxin felt more at ease. This old man's life was in danger, but he was still unwilling to hinder Zio's destiny for personal reasons. His kindness towards Zio was evident. So what if he used 10% of the people's volition? As long as this old man was safe, he would be the empire of Zio's stabilizing force in the future. This was a great deal. Lan Wuxin wished he could just say that if he gave Yunyang a few more % of the people's volition, he could tie this old forefather to the empire of Zio's war chariot. As for repairing the assassin's soul and whatnot, it was only a matter of convenience. Lan Wuxin said solemnly, Elder Yun, as the saying goes, you must act according to the urgency of the matter. Your injury is the most pressing matter now. I believe that His Majesty will surely lend out the imperial seal generously if he knows the reason. This matter is settled. Elder Yun, don't push it away anymore. If you do, you'll be heartless and disregarding our kind intentions. Yunyang shook his head thrice. Who would want to die if there's a cure? Even if His Majesty is willing to give the imperial seal and the volition pearls are fine, we still lack the core of siderite. It's still a waste of effort. Sun Qingfeng looked worried as he said, yes, even if we have the volition pearls, we still lack the core of siderite. But what is the core of siderite? Yunyang smiled. There's no need to worry so much. Everything in this world is destined. It's good if there's one, it's heaven's blessing. If there's none, it's also this old man's fate. This old man has lived for so long, my lifespan has long exceeded that of humans. It's enough no matter what. What else is there that I can't let go of? Huh. Lan Wuxin frowned and said thoughtfully, regarding the siderite, this old man seems to have some impression of it. When the Empire of Zio was founded, it was an auspicious sign from the heavens. A star fell from the sky. Back then, the entire continent was tumbling because of it, fire dragons soared into the sky and tsunamis engulfed half the continent. As for the ruler who founded the nation, he obtained the power of the Skyfall star. Then, he raised his army to rise up and achieve great things. However, I don't know if the Skyfall star from back then still exists. If it does, would it be the so-called core of the Skyfall star? Chapter 412. Sun Qingfeng's eyes suddenly lit up. He took a deep breath and said excitedly, Old Lan, you have to help me no matter what. Only you can persuade His Majesty to hand over the heart of the fallen star. Lan Wuxin frowned and said, I dare not guarantee this. While the imperial jade seal is related to the nation's fate and can be changed, the siderite is a forbidden item of the royal family. It's the foundation of the nation's fate. I'm afraid that His Majesty won't be willing to take the risk. Moreover, the core of siderite may not necessarily be the core of the siderite used to establish the nation. Everything is unknown, it's in between. Sun Qingfeng said anxiously, what are you saying? As long as there are clues and directions, we should give it our all. Elder Yun is now Zio's anchor, the common forefather of the Empire of Zio. What's more, he's contributing to the empire. How can Your Majesty be reluctant to part with even a piece of meteorite? Isn't that disappointing? Lan Wuxin said helplessly, the problem is that this might not even exist now. Sun Qingfeng blew his beard and glared at him. What do you mean it might not exist? I think you just can't bear to part with it. Even if it might not exist, you should at least take it out and give it a try. Lan Wuxin was speechless. Sun Qingfeng paused for a moment before continuing, since the founding emperor borrowed the power of this meteorite to establish his empire, he must have benefited greatly from it. Since he could benefit from it, it must not be an ordinary meteorite. Since it's not an ordinary meteorite, then there's a possibility that there's another mystery in it. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm at least 80% or 90% sure, right? The more Sun Qingfeng thought about it, the more he felt that his conjecture was logical. Therefore, he became more confident in forcing Lan Wuxin to look for the core of siderite. Lan Wuxin looked helpless as he continued to push the responsibility away, not daring to agree to it. After all, this was His Majesty the Emperor's heirloom. It was equivalent to the Empire of Zio's national treasure. How could he dare to take it all for himself? In the end, the two of them almost quarreled. Sun Qingfeng was so anxious that his face was red, and his white beard was blown straight. His anger soared to the heavens. He stomped his feet and said angrily, "Are you going or not? Are you coming or not? You're not going. Holy shit. I don't believe that I can't get this favor even if I have to sacrifice this old face of mine. If I can't get this favor back, Zio's royal family, Zio's imperial court, and physician genius family will no longer accept patients in the future." Lan Wuxin was forced into a corner. Finally, he gritted his teeth and stomped his foot, saying angrily, "F***ck. I'll go, okay?" Sun Qingfeng's anger had yet to subside as he said angrily, "Your tone is obviously reluctant, it means that you've never intended to help." Lan Wuxin, I've finally met you today. It's been so many years and I've only known you today that you're this kind of person. Ever since you became the Prime Minister of the Empire, you've lost all your humanity. Why didn't I realize that earlier? You're an ingrate. You eat and take, but you don't give anything out. You old bastard, I must have been blind to have become your brother for life. I regret it so much. Lan Wuxin was flustered as he held on to Yunyang and whined, "Old forefather, please be the judge. When did I say that I'm not going to help? This old thing is slandering me, this old man." Recalling that it was inappropriate to address himself as an old man in front of the old forefather, he quickly corrected himself, "How far has this fellow pushed me now? How can I be such a person? This Sun Qingfeng is being unreasonable, he's a bastard. Please punish him according to his house's rules, old forefather." Sun Qingfeng was enraged as he sprung up. "Lan Wuxin, you've become a heartless and despicable ruffian ever since you became an official. How dare you punish me according to my house's rules? Has being an official turned your heart black? No wonder people say that those who are righteous are mostly those who butcher dogs and those who are unfaithful are mostly scholars. Lan Wuxin, you've studied too much and turned your heart black. You're a sesame rice ball, your heart is all black. You're the one with a black heart. You're the sesame rice ball, your whole family is sesame rice balls." I'm not talking about you." Lan Wuxin was infuriated, almost spouting nonsense. "Are you King reasonable? Your father will enter the palace now. You old bastard, just you wait. When your father finds the core of siderite, I won't speak to you for 3 years." In front of their old forefather, both of them felt like they had turned into children. Even their attitudes had changed, they had even said things like, "Your father, old bastard, won't speak to you for 3 years." It was as if two children were fighting, and one of them was swearing, "I will never play with you again." Sun Qingfeng said with a flushed face, "It's fine if you don't speak to this old man. Go to the palace first, remember to bring that thing back." Lan Wuxin slapped the table and stood up, saying, "I'll go then." With a huff of his beard and a flick of his sleeves, he turned to leave, slamming the door with a loud bang. Yunyang sighed and said, "Oh, Qingfeng, this is really too much. You shouldn't have used the power of will from the imperial jade seal, and the siderite is the royal treasure, the foundation of the empire of Zio. It can't simply be shown to others. Lan Wuxin, as Zio's official, is asking for the royal treasure. This is really inappropriate. Qingfeng, you've been too forceful just now. We've been brothers for so many years, there mustn't be any cracks. You're still young, you don't know how precious the bond between brothers is. Don't worry, old forefather, it won't happen." Sun Qingfeng, who had been called young, held his head high and said, "If he can't even do this well, I'll cut off all ties with him. If I don't care about old forefathers' matter, what else is worth risking my life for? If I don't do this well, how can I go down to meet my forefather when I'm 100 years old? I'll be scolded to death even if I die." Yunyang smiled and said, "That's possible. Demao, let's not talk about it. It's not a good habit to speak ill of a brother behind his back." Sun Chengfeng laughed as well. Old forefather, you haven't said anything yet? That night, the security at Chancellor Lan's residence was suddenly tighter than usual. His Majesty the Emperor had suddenly arrived. It was not the first time that His Majesty had come to the residence of Lan personally, but it was truly the first time that he had come not for Chancellor Lan Wuxin but for another person's matter. The purpose of His Majesty's trip was to visit Elder Yun. It was Yun Yang's first time meeting His Majesty the Empire of Zhou's Emperor. This emperor of an empire had a majestic gait, muscular physique, rosy cheeks, and spirited eyes. He naturally possessed the aura of a monarch who had descended upon the world. However, the slightly sinister aquiline nose and overly sharp eyes made Yun Yang feel that His Majesty the Emperor was not an easy person to get along with. He should be someone who was more indifferent and paranoid. It would not be an easy task to work under such a monarch. Other than having strong control, such a person's desire to control was equally strong. He would not allow anything to be out of his control. Looking at Lan Wuxin's frail appearance that did not match his age and his hunched back, Yun Yang could imagine the hardships of the officials under this overbearing monarch. This must be Elder Yun. His Majesty the Emperor was very friendly. He laughed when he saw Yun Yang, extremely friendly. Greetings, Your Majesty. Yun Yang bowed slightly and straightened himself. With his current disguise, there was no need for him to kneel before His Majesty the Emperor. A slight bow was already giving the other party face. Elder Yun need not be so courteous. I'm only here to see old forefather, there's nothing else. His Majesty the Emperor was candid and magnanimous, as if he was approachable and courteous. Of course, this was not in Yun Yang's eyes. To Yun Yang, being approachable and courteous was never a compliment. It was a way to entice people to work themselves to death. Under Lan Wuxin's hospitality, His Majesty the Emperor sat down. His casual sitting posture gave off a very relaxed and homey vibe, showing that he did not treat Yun Yang as an outsider at all. However, once he came in and sat down on the main seat, he had already seen through all the pretense. Yun Yang could not help but feel that his evaluation of this man had gone down a notch. His Majesty the Emperor spoke as if he was really here to take a look. After a long string of nonsensical pleasantries, he indicated that he was leaving. At the same time, he invited Yun Yang to take a look at the palace when he was free. Yun Yang agreed with a smile. He was rather wary of the old eunuch who had always been following the emperor. This old eunuch looked rather senile with white hair. Even his body was hunched and his face was frail, as if he could die of old age at any time. However, Yun Yang could sense a lethal threat from this old man. He must be a superb expert, one who was above the peak realm and had already reached the heaven realm. Yun Yang was deep in thought. Chapter 413. Yun Yang recalled something at once. The master that Mi Kongquan had mentioned should be a eunuch as well. It seemed that Supreme Lord Xia of the Four Seasons Tower was Zhou's Minister of Internal Affairs. Could it be this person? If it was this old fellow, it seemed that his cultivation was a bit higher than Supreme Lord Springfrost's. Or could it be that every Supreme Lord of the Four Seasons Tower possessed a cultivation base of the Heaven Realm and Supreme Lord Springfrost was the weakest among the four of them? He recalled that Supreme Lord Springfrost had been severely injured many years ago. Yun Yang thought of many things at once. As if feeling Yun Yang's stare, the old eunuch lifted his head indifferently and glanced at Yun Yang with an ashen gaze. Yun Yang nodded with a smile. The old eunuch lowered his head respectfully and followed the emperor out. Yun Yang's deific consciousness was gentle. There was a smile on his face and a warm gaze, but in his heart, he had already killed this old thing 8 times over. If it had not been for this old thing, Yun Yang might have been able to take the empire of Zhou's emperor hostage and exchange him for old Dugu. However, with this old thing here, Yun Yang could not do anything at all. Yes, it was because he didn't dare to make a move. If he really made a move, not only would he have no hope of succeeding, he would even lose his life. Yun Yang, who had lost the augmentation of his manifestation powers, was only an ordinary beginner heaven realm cultivator. His chances of winning against a high-level expert whose ability was unknown were slim. Not to mention that this was the capital of an enemy nation. His Majesty did not delay any longer and left on his own. However, the words that prompted him to leave had caught Yun Yang's attention. "Your Majesty, the army in the capital region has finished gathering." This was the reason why His Majesty left. It was night. The army was gathering at night, and His Majesty was going there. What was he going to do? There was only one possibility. Go to war. The battle was about to begin. As for who he was going to fight, it was needless to say. Yun Yang's heart was heavy. Time. Being trapped here, he could imagine what kind of pressure Yutong would face if the war were to break out. He had to go back as soon as possible. Yun Yang made up his mind. When His Majesty left, he left behind 2 boxes. The Crown Prince and 2 expert bodyguards who came with His Majesty stayed behind. Lan Wuxin's face was filled with pride, his entire face and heart filled with relief. One of the boxes was the Empire of Zio's imperial seal. As for the other box, it contained Yunxing. The Siderite had existed since the founding of the Empire of Zio and had been passed down for a long time. Zio's royalty would have studied it, but to no avail. The only conclusion they could come up with was that this thing was extremely heavy, at least 100 times heavier than mystical iron of the same size. The weight of dark steel was already quite heavy, at least 10 times that of ordinary fine iron, and this meteorite was 100 times heavier. One could imagine how heavy it was. It was clearly placed on the table steadily, but there was a subtle feeling that it was about to fall. The 4 legs of the table had already left marks on the hard floor of the hall. The furniture in the residence of the minister, especially those in Lan Wuxin's study room, was naturally of the highest quality. The table that carried the 2 boxes was made of supreme-grade blood-red wood. It was not difficult for it to bear 1,000 caddies of weight. Yet, it was like this. As the saying went, one would know one's enemy by seeing one's own. It was obvious that the Siderite was no ordinary object. Yun Yang could not help feeling sentimental. Indeed, those who could become emperors of a generation were no ordinary people. The Emperor of Zio had brought these 2 items here, but he had not even mentioned them when he spoke to Yun Yang. Yun Yang was shaken by her magnanimity and was in awe of her. If he was not Yutong's supreme cloud but the legendary god of wine, Feng Xianga, he would definitely be shaken by such treatment. It was like listening to thunder in silence. His Majesty's tactics and his mastery of the human heart had reached an extreme level. It's no wonder that the Empire of Zio hasn't been at a disadvantage for so many years. With such a talented and magnanimous emperor, as long as the governing methods are adequate, the nation's power will definitely rise. Each of these enemies that Yutong is facing is a hero of a generation. How can there be no reason for the turbulent times of this world? Yun Yang thought to himself. Heroes would be born in troubled times, this was inevitable. And in troubled times, there would definitely be wise monarchs who would appear. However, if the monarchs of the various countries were all wise monarchs, then a war of hegemony that would be passed down through the ages would definitely be written, and blood would flow like rivers. The imperial jade seal and Siderite are here. Sun Chengfeng was overjoyed and impatient. Yun Yang nodded faintly and said, "That's right. Let me check if there's the core of Siderite in here. I hope I won't be disappointed again." Everyone's expression immediately tensed up. Whether there was the core of Siderite or not, it was related to the life of this old forefather in front of them and the completeness of the trap that was used to frame Supreme Cloud. It was truly related to the fate of the nation and whether Zio would survive for generations to come. It must be there, it must be there. Yun-yang touched the box and said, it should be about right. The box that holds the siderite is actually made of fire gold. It's probably because the siderite has the ability to absorb. This old man's initial 50% chance of success has now increased to at least 80% that there's the core of siderite in here. Yun-yang did not delay as he opened the box. A piece of strange metal that resembled a burning flame greeted his eyes. The strange metal was entirely red. It looked like a ball of crystallized flame that was burning intensely all the time. However, such a magnificent and dazzling scene of fire was like a fire elf. Everyone was close at hand, but they did not feel any heat. Yun-yang smiled and took a metal bar and placed it on the piece of metal. Initially, there seemed to be no change, but after a while, the group was surprised to find that the metal bar had actually shrunk without a sound. After a while, the metal bar had completely disappeared. If the group had not been watching with widened eyes, they would not have noticed the entire process. A smile appeared on Yun-yang's face. This is the power of absorption that I've mentioned. In other words, the core of siderite exists in this siderite, and it's a complete one at that. I didn't expect to actually find it here. Lan Wuxin asked, Elder Yun, can this help you? Yun-yang replied, it can, but, his expression was a little conflicted and reluctant. It was a strange expression as he said, it's just a little unfortunate. What's unfortunate? Isn't it, not enough? Sun Qingfeng grew nervous. Yun-yang sighed and said, it's definitely enough, but this is something that concerns Zio's destiny. Once the core of siderite is taken out by me, there's a high chance that this treasure of national destiny will be destroyed. It's definitely not a good thing for the empire of Zio. Lan Wuxin said with a smile, His Majesty has already thought of this when he took it out. Back then, His Majesty said that although this siderite is great, keeping it in the royal family will only have a symbolic meaning. After all, other than the founding ancestor, no one else can use the power of the core of siderite. If it can save Elder Yun and add another national pillar to the empire, it'll be worth it. I'll be even more satisfied. Yun-yang sucked in a long breath and said, Your Majesty is broad-minded, this old man is ashamed. Sun Qingfeng said, Old forefather, please use it as soon as possible. It's more important to heal your injuries as soon as possible. Yun-yang nodded and said, Qingfeng alone will be enough. The rest of you, please go back and rest for this old man's sake. I'm afraid this old man will take a long time, at least a night's time. The core of siderite will trigger the 300-year-old injury in my body. When the two extremes collide and explode, it'll be terrifying. Not only will it be useless to watch, it might even harm me. This old man has to deal with this with all his might. I really don't have the energy to protect everyone. The group nodded in understanding. It was no small feat to cure an injury that had been around for more than 300 years. Elder Yun, as a reclusive expert, was unwilling to let others see his unbearable side, let alone the possibility of danger. Lan Wuxin was the first to leave. The Crown Prince said awkwardly, This, Yun-yang understood the gist of it and said seriously, this old man will first retrieve the people's volition orb from the Imperial Jade Seal. Let your Highness send the Imperial Jade Seal back first before retrieving the core of siderite. The Imperial Jade Seal is an important item of the Empire, it can't be left outside for long. However, it's easy for this old man to retrieve the volition orb. There's no harm in everyone watching. The Crown Prince blushed and said, Thank you, old forefather, for your understanding. His Highness did not doubt this old forefather whom even His Majesty the Emperor had come to pay a visit. He dared not have the slightest doubt either. However, the Imperial Jade Seal was of utmost importance, even more so than the core of siderite whose use was unknown. The Imperial Jade Seal was taken out. It was a huge seal. Yun-yang's gaze flickered with a complicated look. In his deific consciousness, Emi was waving its vines as well, asking how much volition from the people should be extracted. Aya? Yunyang closed his eyes, making a difficult decision in his heart. Finally, he decided, all of it. Aya. Emi was shocked as well. All of it. Was this not too much? This would truly shake the empire of Zio's foundation. Did he not say that it would be a 10% cut at most? The volition of the people in the imperial jade seal was something that could not be seen or touched. It was an almost ethereal existence, but it was something that truly existed. Yunyang had not known about this at first. What he had said earlier was just a gimmick. Even the first, second, and third methods were just nonsense. However, Emi had said that it could really extract the people's volition from the imperial jade seal. The volition of the people was also a form of energy, but it was a very special kind of energy. However, the people's volition in the imperial jade seal was the accumulation of the empire of Zio for 1,000 years. Once all of it was extracted, it would mean that the empire of Zio's citizens' volition had been swept clean. In other words, once it was extracted, it would be equivalent to the empire of Zio's 1,000 years of accumulated national destiny. Something like the fate of a nation had always been a very mysterious but real thing. A man would die if he had no destiny, a nation would perish if it had no destiny. Chapter 4:14. Yunyang could be considered ruthless. He had said that it would be enough to take 10% at most, but in reality, he had taken all of it. No one could tell. As the saying went, a gentleman's revenge was never too late, but a villain's revenge was done from morning till night. Unfortunately, Yunyang was not a gentleman at all. He was a true villain. Revenge must be exacted thoroughly. Ever since Yunyang left Tiantang City and traveled thousands of miles to this trap, he had made this decision. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Yunyang's expression was solemn as he touched the jade seal. A thick green glow rose abruptly. As the green light expanded, a refreshing aura rose, making one feel refreshed. Everyone who was illuminated by the green light felt refreshed. Chancellor Lan, who had been standing by the door, stepped in as well, his gaze bright. Under the nourishment of such a pure force of life, everyone felt refreshed. The minor ailments that had been hidden in their bodies had all disappeared without a trace. Chancellor Lan, who had the weakest physique among them, even felt much better. He was in an unprecedented state. Sun Qingfeng, on the other hand, was so distressed that his lips were trembling. This was old forefather's life force, yet it was being shared by these people. It was heart-wrenching. However, in order to collect the people's volition, he had no choice but to do so. Sun Qingfeng could not help grumbling inwardly, "Why are you being so unreasonable? You've already borrowed the jade seal, what's the big deal about returning a little later? You forced old forefather to perform in front of everyone, wasting so much life force for nothing. I can only hope to finish this quickly and collect the orb of volition so that old forefather won't have to suffer any losses." The strange sight of the green light lingering lasted for the time it took for a joss stick to burn. Everyone in the room benefited greatly. Even His Highness felt that his body, his deific consciousness, and his spirit seemed to have been reborn. He could not help but feel that it was not a big deal to give this old forefather the heart of Siderite just based on this alone. It was worth it. Poor His Highness, the Crown Prince, did not know that his country's millennium-long providence was in his hands. He could only watch as it was all stolen by someone else, yet he still felt that it was worth it. The affairs of the world were mysterious, and there were indeed all sorts of strange things. Fate made fools of people, there was no room for discussion. After the time it took to burn a stick of incense, Yunyang withdrew his hand and stood up. In his palm, there was a green bead that was round and the size of a pigeon egg. The jade pearl was wrapped in a purplish energy, looking really beautiful. Yunyang sucked in a breath. The orb flew up abruptly, glowing with a mystical glow as it slowly entered Yunyang's mouth. It gradually disappeared. Yunyang, who had consumed the amethyst jade bead, looked pale instead, as if he had consumed too much of his life force. Without a word, he closed his eyes to recuperate. The crown prince was still a little reluctant to part with it, savoring the taste of that green life energy. He wanted to bid farewell to Elder Yun, but Elder Yun was already meditating. He could only smack his lips, pick up the jade seal, bid farewell to Prime Minister Lan, and return to the palace with the guards. Chancellor Lan and the others left as well, leaving only Yunyang and Sun Qingfeng in the room. Yunyang was still recuperating with his eyes closed, so Sun Qingfeng dared not disturb him. He almost held his breath as he waited quietly by the side. After a long time, Yunyang opened his eyes. His complexion looked slightly better, but he still said weakly, "Everyone has left." Sun Qingfeng said respectfully, "They have all left. There are only the two of us here now." Yunyang took a deep breath and said, "All right, let's proceed to the next step now. Let's see if this old man can seize the heaven and earth's fortune and cure this incurable disease." As he spoke, he stood up and focused. With a swoosh, a long saber that looked like a work of art in Sun Qingfeng's eyes was unsheathed. Once the saber appeared, it was shrouded in a mystical glow, as if the entire room had entered a dream. Yunyang used the tip of the saber to poke the meteoric metal carefully, slowly exerting force. When he had used 80% of his strength, the meteoric metal began to show marks. "It's really tough." Yunyang was inwardly impressed. The saber that Yunyang was using now was the divine edge. It was a piece of cake for the divine edge to cut through gold, jade, and iron like it was mud. Even the mystical chi of a heaven realm ace cultivator would not be able to withstand it. Yunyang had to use 80% of his strength to be able to cut through it. Yunyang was already a second heaven intermediate cultivator. 80% of his strength would at least be equivalent to a first heaven expert's peak cultivation base. Only then would he be able to match it. Such strength was enough to flatten a small hill. Now that he had used the Blade of Heaven's Will, a unique divine weapon in the world, to unleash its power, it only managed to leave a mark. In that case, the toughness of this rock had truly reached a rather terrifying level. Yunyang sucked in a deep breath, his eyes glinting sharply as he said in a low voice, "I'm going to go all out. Be careful." Sun Qingfeng said obediently, "I'll stay further away then." "Old forefather, do as you please. Don't worry about me." He then stood up and walked straight into the inner chamber. Yunyang nodded. Just as he was about to swing his saber, wanting to see if the siderite could withstand his ultimate power, he suddenly felt a ripple in his deific consciousness space. Emmy's unprecedented excitement emanated from it. "Ayya!" Yunyang was taken aback, following the direction of his thoughts. Emmy's emerald green vines swayed wildly, its petite body twisting like a fried dough twist. "Ayayaya! Ayayaya, what is it so excited about?" Yunyang was subconsciously shaken. "Is this something good?" Yunyang asked. "Ayayaya." Emmy's coquettish voice actually had a tinge of sweetness at the end. Two thin tendrils wrapped around Yunyang's calf. Yunyang was shocked. Emmy had never reacted like this before. Was it coquettish or was it fawning? Although there had been times when it needed it urgently, it had never shown such an attitude. Could this be something good that had never been seen before? Something even better than the Imperial Jade Seal? What is this? Yunyang's mind suddenly sprung to life. If it was something good, he had to keep some of it for himself. He could not let Emmy swallow it all. Ayaya, Emmy was very, very reluctant, obviously unwilling to share. It actually wanted to keep it all to itself. This also proved that this thing was really a good thing. Emmy should be dealing with Zio's Millennium Providence that it had just obtained. That was already a very good thing, but it had actually pulled itself out and behaved in such a manner. It was enough to prove that the siderite was an even more remarkable and rare item of fantasy. Stingy. Yunyang said angrily, "What can you do if you give me some benefits? How can you be so stingy towards your owner? Don't you know that it's good for me that you're good for me? Do you still want to be good?" Emmy lowered its head, its leaves drooping. It looked like it was in the wrong, but it was also listless. Under Yunyang's incessant coercion and temptation, Emmy finally began to explain itself unwillingly. "You're saying that this is a complete star? You must be joking, right?" Yunyang was truly shocked now. "I wonder how it fell from the sky. Does it contain a complete source of stellar energy?" Ayaya. Emmy was rather disdainful of a certain someone's knowledge and fuss. "That's not all?" Yunyang's eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. "Ayaya, is this the soul of a star?" Yunyang's eyes began to glow green. Emmy waved its tendrils speechlessly, whipping the air in his deific consciousness. "Only the outermost heat source has been taken away. No one has touched the core inside? It's not that they don't want to, but that no one can?" Yunyang swallowed. Looking at Emmy's admission, Yunyang finally understood what this head-sized thing was. This was really not something he could swallow. A complete star. The founding emperor of the Empire of Zio was called Zi Yunlong. Yunyang knew this person very well. When this person founded the empire, he was unrivaled in the world and was the publicly acknowledged unrivaled expert of Tianxian continent. Once this person struck, the flames in his moves could roast his opponent's body directly. It was incomparably domineering. What was more, if he were to strike with all his might, incinerating his opponent into a puff of smoke was as easy as a wave of his hand. That was why the reputation of the Inferno Emperor was unparalleled in the world. However, according to Emmy, this Inferno Emperor seemed to have only absorbed the outermost flame energy of this star. He was not blessed enough to enjoy the energy within the star at all. Besides, it seemed that only the outermost flame energy was too domineering. It was said that this Inferno Emperor had lost control of the flame energy in his twilight years and suffered a backlash, ultimately dying of regret. He could not carry on the legend of invincibility to the end, and the Empire of Zio's territory had stopped expanding to its current state. According to Emmy, this invincible Inferno Emperor had not even absorbed 1/100th of the meteorite's energy. No, Emmy corrected Yunyang's thoughts directly. This Inferno Emperor had not even obtained 10,000th of the meteorite's energy. He had only obtained the most superficial protection of the meteorite's outer layer. The real treasures were still kept within the meteorite. Chapter 4:15. In spite of it, Yunyang could not help but be skeptical of such an explanation. It was too exaggerated and outrageous. Aside from the fact that the Flame Emperor was unparalleled and invincible, how could he have absorbed less than 1,000th of the siderite's power? Furthermore, if this siderite was actually a complete star, how could it be so small? How could a complete star fall from the sky? Emmy grew increasingly contemptuous of Yunyang's suspicion. "Ayaya, what?" Yunyang was enraged. "You dare call me a country bumpkin? It looks like you really don't want to get better." "Ayaya." Emmy cowered immediately, expressing that its master was not a country bumpkin after all. Yunyang snorted, not bothering to argue with this fellow. Who asked him to be so ignorant? He was quite a country bumpkin too. Besides, he could not collect the thing inside by himself. He still needed Emmy's help. It would not be too late to deal with this fellow after he had reaped enough benefits. When that time came, he would let Emmy know why the flowers were red and that its master should not simply call him a country bumpkin. Yunyang was even more motivated now that he had obtained the appraisal. Raising the saber in his hand, he swung it down amidst Emmy's nervous cries. It was like a flash of lightning. Yunyang had used 120% of his strength in this slash. He had given it his all. Following Emmy's instructions, he had shaved off a small piece of the siderite's outer skin. The purplish-red core of the siderite was exposed. It was exactly the same. Yunyang's slash was successful. Without hesitation, he slashed left and right, forward and back, up and down. After 6 slashes, only the core of the siderite, the size of 2 fists, was left. Next, it was time for Emmy to show its prowess. An unprecedentedly rich force of vitality wrapped around Yunyang's hands. Yunyang held the siderite in place with one hand while the other held the divine edge and slowly sliced inwards. It was a crucial moment now, a crucial one. Even if the essence within was slightly damaged, it would be a great loss. Yunyang was the only one in the world who could do such a thing. Other than Yunyang, no one else, no matter how formidable their cultivation base was or how incisive their arcane skills were, could do it. Because the only thing that could resist this kind of high temperature was the origin energy of life, which was the most extravagant way to come into contact with the core of a meteorite. Of course, this was also thanks to the blade of heaven's will, the only thing that could cut a meteorite. If it were someone else, putting aside the question of whether or not they could destroy the outer layer of the meteorite, even if they could, the heat of the inner core of the meteorite would be enough to burn them into ashes. It didn't matter how powerful the expert was. When the core of the meteorite appeared, it inevitably emitted an extremely high temperature, but it was all neutralized by the life force. Countless wisps of smoke rose, and in an instant, the room was shrouded in thick smoke, filled with a burning smell. This was burning the purest form of life energy. Just this extravagance was enough to stun anyone. Outside the room, in the sky above the small courtyard, thick smoke rose into the sky and covered the sky. Just by looking at the smoke, one would think that half of Zilong City was on fire. In the inner chamber, Sun Chengfeng looked outside in awe. Those balls of dense life force were burning. Sun Chengfeng's beard was shaking from the heartache. Yunyang continued to cut while Emmy unleashed its relentless output. Finally, a pale yellow glow appeared from within the meteorite, like a flowing liquid. It was crystal clear, smooth, and actually seemed to be viscous. In the next moment, a strange fragrance permeated the air. At the same time, a heavy feeling similar to the force of earth appeared. Before Yunyang could feel it, before he could even catch a glimpse of it, the pale yellow glow that had just appeared had all disappeared. Emmy was like a weasel that had been waiting for hundreds and thousands of years. The moment it saw a chick, it rushed out with bloodshot eyes and swept it clean. It had been taken. It had finally been taken. In an instant, the remnant of the meteorite dimmed, leaving only a small shell. There was a small gap on the shell. It was as big as a goose egg, but the yolk inside was gone. The outer layer that had lost its core was no longer warm. After a while, the thick smoke disappeared as well. Sun Chengfeng stood at the door of the inner chamber and asked carefully, "Old forefather, is everything all right on your side? Is everything going well?" Yunyang immediately ordered Emmy to recover to its best state and said tiredly, "For now, I'm fine. However, my cultivation base still needs to be trained back step by step. Even if my illness is gone, it's impossible to recover the cultivation base that I've lost for 300 years in a day." Sun Chengfeng was overjoyed and said, "That's great. That's great. It's great that you're fine." Before his words echoed in the air, he rushed out impatiently and took Yunyang's pulse. "This is amazing. This is too mystical, truly too mystical." Sun Chengfeng clicked his tongue in wonder. Our ancestors' prescription really has the miraculous ability to seize the fortune of heaven and earth. Now, old forefather, your pulse doesn't feel like an old man at all. Your pulse now is that of an 18 or 19-year-old lad. Your heartbeat, bodily functions, this. The more Sun Qingfeng checked, the more surprised he was. He was grinning from ear to ear. Old forefather, this is great. You've obviously regained your youth. Yunyang chuckled and said, it's considered regaining my youth in another sense. If I were to come to this city in this state and tell others that I've lived for hundreds of years, I'd probably be beaten to death. Sun Qingfeng guffawed. That's for sure, really. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I'd be the first to expose you, old forefather. Your current state, from head to toe, is filled with the traces of a young man. There's no sign of aging at all. Then, he sighed. It's a pity that I've recovered too late. Old forefather can't retrieve 80% of your cultivation base. Yunyang smiled. Foolish child, this old man has such a body now. Do I still have to worry about not being able to cultivate it back? Sun Qingfeng smiled. That's true. With your current state, it's nothing even if you live another 300 to 500 years, even if you're immortal. Sun Qingfeng was very excited, wanting to go out immediately to report this good news. However, he was stopped by Yunyang. Wait a moment. Yes, old forefather. There's only the two of us now. Let's talk among ourselves. Yunyang thought about it and said, Qingfeng, do you still remember the family motto of your physician genius family? Sun Qingfeng answered, of course I do. The family motto of the physician genius family, a physician should have a benevolent heart, treat the sick and save people, practice medicine to help the world and the people. Don't be tempted by profit, don't forget your original intention. Nobles and commoners are all patients. Yunyang nodded seriously and said, your forefather didn't tell you that you can only treat people from the empire of Zio, did he? Sun Qingfeng answered, absolutely not. I've always traveled the world. Although I've spent more time in the empire of Zio, there's always a few years where I've been practicing medicine in other empires. A physician has never been limited by country or region. There's only the difference between a quack and a good physician. Yunyang patted Sun Qingfeng's shoulder. Remember your forefather's words. A physician should have the heart of a parent, a physician should have the heart of the world. The physician genius family should be passed down forever. Let the whole world be able to enjoy the benevolence of the physician genius family. Those who are accomplished will help the world. You're an accomplished person in the field of medicine, you should help the people. This grandson will remember old forefathers' teachings. Sun Qingfeng accepted the teachings wholeheartedly. All right, you may leave. Yunyang's voice was low and dreamy. If there's nothing else, I hope that you won't get involved in Zio's world hegemony. Now that the war has begun, if you want to stay out of it, it's best that you leave as soon as possible. Sun Qingfeng said in a low voice, reluctant to part, this grandson only wants to serve old forefather for a few more days, leave tomorrow. Yunyang sighed. The chaos has begun. My cultivation base hasn't recovered yet, I'm afraid I can't take care of you while you're here. We'll meet again in the martial world in the future. It'll be much easier for me to find you than for you to find me. Those who know you now are far more than those who know this old man. A certain someone's acting skills were getting better. The last part of his speech was actually an ancestor who was teasing an accomplished descendant. How impressive. Sun Qingfeng was silent for a moment before he said, all right. Since old forefather has ordered, this grandson shall leave Zilong City tonight. I won't stay any longer. Yunyang nodded in relief and patted Sun Qingfeng's shoulder. A large ball of refined air of vitality flowed into Sun Qingfeng's meridians. Sun Qingfeng turned around in shock. Old forefather, how can this be? He could feel that old forefather was truly generous this time, even exceeding the so-called generous category. This was because the energy of vitality was enough to restore his vital signs to the prime of his life. This was the immensity of the heavens and the vastness of the earth, a blessing that was akin to being reborn. It could even be said that Yun Yang's action was equivalent to giving him a brand new physical body, extending his lifespan by at least 60 years. Live a few more years if you can. Yun Yang said slowly, it can also allow the physician genius family to save a few more people in this world. A physician's benevolence is a physician's original intention, it's also a physician's original intention. Never forget it. Sun Qingfeng knelt on the ground, tears streaming down his cheeks. Chancellor Lan was overjoyed at old forefather's recovery, but he did not feel the slightest heartache over the siderite. After all, the siderite was only a symbol to the royal family. If it was given to old forefather, it could bring the dead back to life and turn stone into gold. No, it had to be at least platinum, crimson gold, or even purple gold. A great lord who could help the empire of Zhou stabilize its destiny and serve as a stabilizing force was much better than a mere decoration or a symbol. How could this be considered a great bargain? The empire of Zhou had gained a great bargain. Of course, Lan Wuxin would never have guessed that what the empire of Zhou was giving away this time was not just a decoration or a symbol. It could create a legend of invincibility, it was a chance to soar through the 9 heavens and become a true dominator. In addition to that, it could be said that the fate and destiny of the entire empire had been wrapped up in a single package and handed over to Lan Wuxin. Chapter 4:16. Before Yun Yang had come to the empire of Zhou and completed this round, he had never thought that he would gain so much from his improvisation due to the trap. Yun Yang even felt a little guilty. He had deceived them completely this time. First, he had become Zhou's old forefather, then he had become the nation's acknowledged anchor and pillar of support. Now, he had even taken the nation's most precious treasure. Was it a little too much? He would probably become the nation's public enemy in the future. However, after checking his deific consciousness space, Yun Yang felt something. It would not be too much even if such a good thing happened 10 or 8 times a day. The more the better. Yun Yang could not be blamed for his insatiable greed. He had always been a humble and cautious person, contented with what he had and never been greedy. Alas! This time, the newly obtained soul of the fallen star had brought him too many benefits, too great. The soul of Siderite was now being treated as Emmy's foundation soil in the deific consciousness space, buried under its roots. Emmy's current state was unprecedentedly healthy. The thickness of its leaves was almost as thick as a finger. The fine hair on it was clearly covered by a layer, and the leaves were almost twice their original size. There were only 3 leaves, but they were like a lotus pond that was floating in the emerald waves. It was a spectacular sight. With the help of the soul of Siderite, the power that Emmy could unleash was unprecedented. At this moment, the deific consciousness was filled with purple chi, as if it was about to rain. Sensing it, he realized that the density of the spiritual chi was almost 5 times higher than before. In addition, this was the result of the soul of Siderite not fully unleashing its true power yet. If you can completely absorb the power of earth in the soul of Siderite, Master can become a god directly. This was what Emmy said. It was simple, brutal, and tempting at the same time. Naturally, Yun Yang had high expectations for this. Emmy's last words surprised Yun Yang even more. Owning the soul of the Siderite is basically the same as condensing all the essence of the entire Tianxian continent planet beneath your feet into a single piece, and all of it will belong to you alone. Furthermore, I'm afraid that the value of this meteorite is even greater than the value of the profound sky continent. I believe that even the legendary Great Earth Elemental is only this much. When Yun Yang heard the good news, he was so excited that he lost his sense of direction. In the end, he was beaten back to his original state by Emmy's words. The only regret is that the power is too vast. Master can't absorb it at all. Even a drop of it is enough to blow the current master up. Yunyang sobered up at once, but he immediately felt unwell. At the very least, he was at the beginning stage of the heaven realm, and he also cultivated the multiphase mystique. Was he so weak that he couldn't handle even a single drop? Under Yunyang's relentless questioning, Emmy replied, "It's a super-concentrated form of earth essence that surpasses the entire Tianxian continent. With Master's current physique, it's true that you can't bear even a drop of it. You're not even qualified to draw it slowly. Of course, when Master can combine the 9 Supremes' manifestation powers into one, you can absorb this energy bit by bit. In other words, the day the 9 Supremes' manifestation powers are combined will be the day you can absorb this energy." Yunyang was filled with anticipation once again. However, the most important thing now was his original intention of coming here. Old Dugu's matter. He had to resolve it as soon as possible. His identity as Old Forefather was not completely flawless after all. It was better to resolve the matter as soon as possible. Besides, there was also the matter of the Shangguan family of generals' ancestors' remains. If it was possible, he should try his best to resolve it as well. Otherwise, it would only be a shadow that would haunt the Shangguan family of generals forever, an everlasting threat. Everything was going according to his wishes. Things were progressing more smoothly than Yunyang had expected. Chancellor Lan was even more anxious than Yunyang about the healing of the soul. "Old Forefather, can we begin the healing of the soul?" Lan Wuxin asked. Based on Yunyang's understanding of Lan Wuxin, as well as his background and persona as the head of the Empire of Zio's civil officials, there was no reason for him to be so impatient and open about it. He should have at least been more tactful. Yunyang was subconsciously stunned when he heard the question. So impatient? There was no falsehood in the question. Yunyang's original intention was to bring up the matter of healing the soul, but he had considered whether he would appear too enthusiastic and cause unnecessary suspicion if he brought it up abruptly. Therefore, he was contemplating how he should broach the subject. Should he show off his acting skills to show that the country has treated him well and that he, an expert, should return the favor? Or should he continue to reject and welcome? Yunyang had not expected Chancellor Lan to bring it up right away when they met and to be unusually impatient. "I can't not be impatient." Chancellor Lan's face was scrunched up in a frown. In front of outsiders, including His Majesty the Emperor, he had always been steady and elegant. He did not even bother to conceal his impatience in front of Old Forefather. He was only a child in front of Old Forefather at his age, why was he still putting on airs? "The Shangguan family of generals has arrived." Yunyang's heart skipped a beat as he blurted out, "You mean the Shangguan family of generals' men have entered the city?" He then said, "Didn't you say that there's still 1,000 miles to go? No matter what, I should still have about 3 days of free time." Lan Wuxin sighed. 1,000 miles was said the day before yesterday. Now that they've arrived, everything is like a knocked arrow on the bow. We have no choice but to release it. Yunyang's mind raced as he came up with a plan to deal with the sudden change. Yunyang really could not understand why Shangguan Lingxiu had entered the city. Had the letter not been delivered? Yunyang's expression turned grim as he asked in a low voice, "Are you all going to execute the plan?" Lan Wuxin heaved a deep sigh and said, "We had no choice but to act, but now we can't. According to our previous detection, Shangguan Lingxiu came with 8,000 disciples from the Shangguan family of generals, but she's only brought 100 people into the city now." This was what Lan Wuxin was most conflicted about. If 8,000 men had entered the city together, Lan Wuxin would have asked for Yunyang's opinion. Yunyang might have chosen to wait if he had a way, but if he could not recover his soul, he would have ordered the extermination of everyone from the Shangguan family of generals without hesitation. Now, however, Shangguan Lingxiu had only brought 100 men into the city. The Empire of Zio's position was unprecedentedly awkward. The Empire of Zio would not dare lay a hand on these 100 men, even if they were given 100 guts. If Supreme Cloud was not among these 100 men, not only would they alert the enemy, they would also become a laughing stock. According to the intelligence, the identity, appearance, and mystical skill of the 100 men who had come with Shangguan Lingxiu matched some of the experts among the Shangguan family's henchmen. The information on each of them could be traced back to decades ago, there was no doubt about it. In other words, there were no unfamiliar faces among them under the high-end care of the powerful intelligence network. They were all people who were expected to come. As for Supreme Cloud, even if his background was a mystery, he could never be a henchman of the Shangguan family. Therefore, there was a high chance that Supreme Cloud was not among these 100 men. However, was Supreme Cloud definitely not among these 100 men? It was impossible to say for sure, it was not 100%. There was still a 10 to 20% chance that he was not. Therefore, the current awkward situation was that there was no way to say for sure that he was, and there was no way to say for sure that he was not. If they were to strike and these 100 men were all dead, and Supreme Cloud was not among them, the situation would become extremely dire. However, they had no choice but to strike. What if Supreme Cloud was among them? Would they not miss out on a godsend opportunity? Once they missed it, the opportunity would never come again. Therefore, upon knowing that Yutong's Shangguan family of generals had entered the city, from the Emperor to the Four Seasons Tower's martial world experts, all of them were conflicted and embarrassed. They were stuck in a dilemma, unable to advance or retreat. Of course, the Four Seasons Tower wanted to strike directly. They did not want to be caught in the off chance. There would be no chance if they were killed. What happened next would not be of much concern to them anyway. However, Zio's royalty was adamant. Let's wait a little longer. Wait a little longer. We must wait a little longer. Wait for what? Of course, it was to see if Yunyang's old forefather could recover the assassin's soul. Therefore, Chancellor Lan was burning with anxiety. Even if he lost his composure, he had to urge them. My condition is better than expected. I can indeed give it a try now. Yunyang frowned. Sigh, I had thought that I would still have 8 to 10 days to spare, at least 3 to 5 days later when I have recovered a level or two of cultivation base. I would then proceed with this. If it has to be done today, this old man's chances aren't too high. This old man will tell you this first, Chancellor Lan. 8 to 10 days? It was impossible to wait that long. Even if it was only 3 to 5 days, it was still a dilemma. Shall we do it today then? Lan Wuxin asked eagerly. All right then. Yunyang kept quiet for a bit, feeling rather helpless. Now? Lan Wuxin asked immediately. He was truly anxious now, no longer caring about his demeanor. He was like a child begging for candy. To Lan Wuxin, however, he was no different from a child in front of this old forefather. Acting coquettishly now was embarrassing, but as long as it was effective, it was fine. Yunyang looked at him like he was looking at a weirdo. This fellow really did not behave like a prime minister. Lan Wuxin blushed, actually feeling like a primary school student who had done something wrong. Cough, it's really urgent. Yunyang nodded helplessly. All right, let's do it then. Sun Qingfeng had made up his mind and said, Old forefather, your body is fine now. Just rest well from now on. This grandson shall take his leave now. Yunyang nodded. Very well. Chapter 4:17. Sun Qingfeng rolled his eyes and left after bowing deeply at Yunyang. Watching Sun Qingfeng's silhouette disappear at the entrance of the courtyard, Yunyang was silent. Through his deific consciousness, Sun Qingfeng had left the door, picked up Lan Wuxin's token, packed his medical box, and left for the city gate. If we meet again in the future, I'll definitely return the favor. I won't ask you to acknowledge me as your ancestor for nothing, Yun Yang said quietly in his heart. Yun Yang did not have a good impression of everyone in the Empire of Zhou during his trip to the Empire of Zhou this time. He wanted to kill them all. However, Sun Qingfeng was the only exception. A pure healer, he was worthy of respect. Yun Yang had no choice but to make use of such a person by chance. Of course, Yun Yang would not be indifferent. As the saying went, a prophecy came true. When both of them met again in the future, they would no longer be the same person, but Yun Yang would always remember the vow he had made today. He had given Sun Qingfeng many benefits and had sincerely called him old forefather many times. He had nothing to say when he was not capable, but when he was capable and had resources, he would naturally give benefits. Then, Yun Yang followed Lan Wuxin, who was impatient from waiting but dared not show it on his face. Along the way, Yun Yang could clearly feel that the atmosphere in Zilong City had undergone a drastic change from 2 days ago. Previously, it had been jittery and panicky, but the people's daily lives were still the same. Although it was affected, it was not too severe. Now, there were almost no pedestrians on the streets as far as the eye could see. Squads of armored soldiers could be seen shuttling back and forth. Countless experts armed with sabers and swords were patrolling slowly at every corner or even on the streets. Waves of powerful deific consciousness rippled in the air. It was as if there were no blind spots in the sky or on the ground. Not to mention Supreme Cloud, who had lost his manifestation powers. Even Ling Xiaozui and Jun Moyan would not be able to enter Zilong City without being noticed. A faint murderous aura had completely enveloped the entire Zilong City. At this moment, Zilong City was like a huge barrel of dynamite. All it needed was a spark to ignite and cause a massive explosion. Yun Yang's robes fluttered as he walked on the road while Lan Wuxin whipped his horse and galloped beside him. Under the old forefather Yun Yang's restrained speed, Lan Wuxin's steed could barely keep up even if it sped at full speed. If it were not for him leading the way, Yun Yang would have long disappeared. On both sides were bodyguard experts. They were divided into 2 teams and advanced rapidly. In front of him was his destination, the heavenly prison of the Ministry of Justice. Yun Yang could only feel the blood in his heart surging and boiling, unable to be suppressed. There was even a faint murderous intent gathering in his eyes. Old Dugu. I'm coming. I'm here to save you and let you live a peaceful life. I'll be filial to you and let you enjoy the happiness of a family in your old age. What 7th brother Blood Lord didn't have time to do, I'll do it for him. I'll do everything. You have me for everything. In front. The chief official of the Ministry of Justice came out to greet them, but his face was pale. Lan Wuxin whipped his horse over and dismounted. He staggered and almost fell. How is it? The chief official of the Ministry of Justice looked pale. That lord is still here. No one has come near. Lan Wuxin sighed as well and said, all right. Walking to Yun Yang, he said with a pained expression, old forefather, there's something unexpected that I didn't tell you before. Yun Yang frowned. What accident? Why didn't you just say it? It's actually one of the omissions you mentioned earlier. The unrivaled swordsman, Jun Moyan, is here. Lan Wuxin said with a pained expression, since the assassin damaged himself and became a living dead, Jun Moyan has suddenly arrived and has been guarding outside the prison, not allowing anyone to come near. Yun Yang's gaze flickered. Jun Moyan? He's actually defending the assassin here. Where does he stand? Has he forgotten about his homeland? Elder Yun had just received all the help from his homeland and was filled with nostalgia for his homeland. He was also the oldest fellow in the family, so it was only right for him to say such a thing. However, Yun Yang's true thoughts were in a whirlwind of emotions. He did not expect the variable, Jun Moyan, to be here. Would his existence alter his rescue plan and extend it to an unpredictable direction? Jun Moyan was now the biggest accident, a variable that was completely out of his control. How could Yun Yang not be alarmed? His rescue mission to Zio this time had been full of twists and turns. There were countless accidents and variables everywhere. Although Jun Moyan was a huge variable, Yun Yang was not overly alarmed. After all, he still had the medallion of gratitude with him. Could he use it when necessary? Perhaps, he could gain Jun Moyan's assistance and increase his chances of success. What Yun Yang was most worried about was whether the Four Seasons Tower's master, Mr. Nian, would suddenly appear and target the only surviving member of the Nine Supremes. Was it not within reason for the Four Seasons Tower's master to personally hold the line? Yun Yang's head was throbbing right now. Seeing that Chancellor Lan had arrived with another person, the people who were waiting in front naturally opened up a path for them. The Board of Justice's doors that had not been opened for years opened wide and everyone entered one after another. As all of them surged in, a strand of fierce sword chi suddenly surged out from within, and it came from all directions, causing all of them to feel that ghastly coldness. As far as the eye could see, the source of the sword chi came from a small courtyard. On the surface, it seemed that there were only 5 rooms in this small courtyard. However, there was another world below. There was an underground secret chamber, which was originally the expedient and secret torture place of the Ministry of Justice. Every important criminal had to be interrogated here first. After the verdict was passed, it was decided whether or not to send them to prison. Now, the Board of Justice's men could not enter this small yard. Not only the Board of Justice, everyone in the Empire of Zio, including His Majesty the Emperor, could not enter either. Other than the unconscious assassin who had been lying on the bed, there was another person here. It was this person who had turned this space into Zio's forbidden zone. Jun Moyan. 1 man and 1 sword, intimidating Zio. A guard took a step forward and walked in front of the tightly shut courtyard door. He raised his voice and said, "Senior Jun, a godly doctor has arrived to treat the assassin inside. Please open the door and let the godly doctor in. If you delay, you will only delay the assassin's life." Just as his words echoed, the sword intent in the air changed abruptly, the murderous intent intensified. Everyone present who had a long sword by their waist clanged loudly without exception. It was the sudden change in the sword intent, triggering a reaction from all the swords in the world. A cold voice spoke faintly, "Divine Physician?" What divine physician? Even the head of the physician genius family, known as the unrivaled divine physician in the world, can't cure my brother. Who else in this world can surpass his medical skill? Or do you all have some conspiracy up your sleeves again? Do you really think that Jun Moyan won't dare kill you? Before the people outside could speak, the voice said coldly, "Fine, even if there's a conspiracy, it's just a sneaky trick. So what? I'd like to see who you've invited and what capabilities he has. He dares to claim that he can cure my old friend." Following these words, the tightly shut black door that was about 200 feet away from the crowd suddenly opened slowly. This courtyard, this Zio forbidden zone, was finally revealed before the eyes of the public. As far as the eye could see, there were 5 pitch-black houses on the other side. Even the trees inside, the tiles on the houses, the windows, and the steps were all black. In his field of vision, it was like a huge black hole. However, there was a patch of white amidst the darkness, blinding and blinding. Right in the middle of the courtyard, in front of the door of the house in the middle, a man dressed in white sat cross-legged. Other than a head of black hair that fluttered in the wind, his clothes were pure white. In front of him was a table, and he was sitting behind it. The table was black. There was a sword rack on it, also black. On this sword rack, a long sword was placed horizontally, glinting with a cold, indifferent gleam. At first glance, this sword looked very ordinary. It was no different from the common and inferior swords sold in ordinary weapon manuals. It was just that the scabbard of this sword was red, and the blade of the sword was snow white, so bright that it was unusual. Although the sword was placed there casually, it seemed to be able to emit a kind of hazy glow automatically, blocking the dust in the air. As for the man in white, he just sat there calmly behind the table. Not only was his sword spotless, but he was also spotless. A gust of wind blew, his white robe and black hair billowed, but he remained motionless. Although he knew that thousands of experts had gathered in front of him, he did not even lift his head, there was not even the slightest change in his gaze. He did not even look at the people in front of him, his eyes only focused on the sword before him as he said faintly, "If you have the confidence to cure my friend, come in. However, you must remember that if you can't cure the patient, the healer will have to pay with his life. The physician genius family has come with benevolent intentions. I can give you a way out, but others can't. Don't ask for trouble and only add to your regrets." An assistant minister from the Board of Justice beside Lan Wuxin said loudly, "Senior Jun, please don't forget that you're also from the Empire of Zio. Now that the country is in danger, everyone should be contributing to their country. This assassin is our enemy. You've done this." Jun Moyan, who was seated, did not move. He only looked up, his gaze cold. A ray of sword light flashed. The official who was shouting suddenly fell to the ground with a thud. There was a tiny hole on his forehead. Blood spurted out of the wound like strands of hair, but he had already lost his life. He had breathed his last, and his soul had gone to the netherworld. A man had been killed with just a glance. The hearts of everyone present shook, and they felt a chill run down their spines. Chapter 4:18. Killing with a single word of disagreement. Judging from the intense murderous aura and the equally repressed hostility, Jun Moyan had been suppressing such thoughts for a very, very long time. Therefore, when this official provoked him in public, he finally had an excuse to kill. Therefore, the official's death was inevitable. It was also because of this that Jun Moyan's rage had a chance to be vented. At least, the anger that had accumulated to its peak had been vented a little, at least, it was no longer as extreme as before. Lan Wuxin sighed and said loudly, "Senior Jun, even if that person's tone wasn't pleasant, it's the truth. How could you kill him just like that? Isn't it a little too harsh?" Jun Moyan raised his head slowly. Yunyang finally saw the face that was as perfect as a marble statue. However, there was only extreme rage overflowing on that face, there was no other emotion. His voice was slow, as if he was forcefully restraining himself. "Have you all treated me as someone from the Empire of Zio?" Jun Moyan had never been a man of many words. There was a rumor in the martial world that Jun Moyan was cold on the outside and cold on the inside, a man of few words. He was like a moving iceberg. Sword Mountain. This could be felt from the rumors in the martial world, what they had seen just now, and even his personality. This time, however, it was as if the floodgates of his rage had been opened, surprising even Yunyang. Jun Moyan had tried his best to speak calmly and with a controlled tone, but it still made the crowd feel like an erupting volcano was about to erupt. "Your fight for the world and the destruction of lives and so on has nothing to do with me. The existence of the empire is to ensure the safety of the people internally, to defend the enemies externally, and to protect the people. Based on this alone, whatever you do is understandable. Whether you're from Zio or not, you're in no position to criticize. You want to capture the assassin because this assassin has assassinated an imperial court official. This is the right thing to do. I, Jun Moyan, have nothing to say even if you capture him, interrogate him, or even kill him on the spot. Our friendship is ultimately a personal one, what you're doing is the nation's law. When the two are at odds, the nation's law comes first. Even if I take revenge for my friend because of this matter, it's something that will happen in the future. It has nothing to do with the present. This is my understanding and also my standpoint. However, all of you should not have forcefully pinned the Empire of Zio's name on me. You've always claimed that I'm from the Empire of Zio and used this righteousness to manipulate me to complete your conspiracy. Jun Moyan's calm gaze was like the boiling magma beneath the surface. All personal grudges should indeed give way to the righteousness of the nation. I have no objection to this, but your subsequent actions have infuriated me. You're not satisfied, you continue to use me. You used me to distract my friend so that you could search his soul. Seeing that this plan didn't work, he came up with another plan. He used my fame to spread the news and set up a trap to lure his friends and relatives here. Lan Wuxin, Great Chancellor Lan, if you're telling me the truth, then let's just say the truth. The truth is that you've used my friend and my relationship to carry out these devious deeds. As a citizen of Zio, it's only right for me to put the nation's affairs first and restrain my emotions and principles. I don't need you to teach me what I should do. However, I've done what I should do. Yet, you still want to stop me from doing what I shouldn't have done? Who is right and who is wrong? How do you explain it? Jun Moyan's gaze was like the gleaming light of a long sword in the air. He laughed mockingly and said, "What do you take me, Jun Moyan, for? Until now, you still want to use the righteousness of the nation to pressure me." Jun Moyan laughed mockingly. "I don't know if you're overestimating yourselves or looking down on me. I'm a citizen of Zio, yes, but my loyalty is to this nation and its people, not to you bunch of bureaucrats. You've been using the righteousness of the country to keep me here, unable to move. I've watched as my old friend, my benefactor, was tortured by you, had his soul searched by you, had his family and friends set up by you, and now I'm a part of the trap. How do you expect me, Jun Moyan, to live in the martial world and in this world in the future? If I hadn't restrained myself, the target of that sword should have been you, Great Chancellor Lan." Jun Moyan's long speech in one breath stunned Lan Wuxin, who was standing opposite him. To be fair, had he really gone overboard? A Zio official said angrily, "Senior Jun, we respect you as a senior and have never offended you. We don't think we've done anything wrong in terms of etiquette. This official thinks that for the nation's cause, we can only choose our sides. Even if there are some losses and grievances, it's all within reason. There's no need to be calculative." This lowly official can't understand why Senior Jun is so indignant. "Why did you come here?" Jun Moyan smiled oddly and said, "What's your name? How old are you?" This official is Huang Weishan, 25 years old this year. "I'm only a minor official in the Board of Justice. Naturally, I'm nothing in Senior Jun's eyes." Huang Weishan spoke boldly, his head held high and his chest puffed out in a righteous manner. Jun Moyan said faintly, "Huang Weishan, since you're so loyal and righteous for the nation, I'm sure you're willing to disregard your personal ties for the greater good, am I right?" Huang Weishan said solemnly, "Of course. Nothing can be sacrificed before the greater good." Jun Moyan's expression was still indifferent as he said, "Well said. Go home now and kill your parents, wife, and children." Huang Weishan flushed and said angrily, "What did you say? Why is that?" Jun Moyan said faintly, "Because this is my condition. As long as you kill your parents, wife, and children immediately and let me see your determination, I'll open the door immediately. You've killed your parents, wife, and children. You've done your duty as Zio's official for Zio's cause. I believe that whether it's Chancellor Lan here or Zio's emperor who's not here, they'll remember your merit." Huang Weishan said angrily, "How dare you? How dare you?" Jun Moyan said mockingly, "How dare you? Weren't you speaking frankly and righteously just now? Shouldn't your parents give in for the sake of the nation? Where do you stand? A mere minor official from the Board of Justice doesn't even want to kill your parents, wife, and children, but you're forcing me, the unrivaled swordsman, to sacrifice my friends and brothers? Hypocritical, shameless, and sanctimonious. You really have guts. Huang Weishan, don't forget your real name in your next life. You're called hypocrisy, not Weishan. With a flash of sword light, the official named Huang Weishan was beheaded as he chased after the official from before. Lan Wuxin was furious. Senior Jun, you. Jun Moyan said with disdain, Great Chancellor Lan, I think you only remember that Jun Moyan is from the Empire of Zio, but you've forgotten something about him. Lan Wuxin's heart skipped a beat as he asked subconsciously, what is it? Jun Moyan's eyes glinted as he said faintly, that is. Jun Moyan, who roams the world with a sword in his hand. He said in a low voice, this means that when I have a sword in my hand, all of you shut up. Otherwise, die. Lan Wuxin was not the only one who felt a chill run down everyone's spine. This martial world rumor was like a sharp sword hovering in the air above everyone's throats, allowing them to feel the murderous intent clearly. It was as if the sword could snatch away their souls at any time and send them to their deaths in the mortal world. It was at this moment that an old but elegant voice rang out with a hint of mirth, Jun Moyan is Jun Moyan indeed, so domineering. This old and useless one has lived for many years, but this is the first time I've seen it. Jun Moyan's eyes flashed with sword light. Who are you? Tell me your name. Yun Yang's green silhouette took a step forward and said, I'm the person they've asked to restore your friend's soul. Jun Moyan asked, do you have the ability? Yun Yang smiled. Do you think I can defeat you? Jun Moyan's gaze was like a sharp sword as it scanned Yun Yang and sneered, you're not weak, but you're still not my opponent. If I wish to save your life, a single sword strike is enough. Yun Yang laughed. Isn't that simple? If I can't restore him in the end, just kill me. What's the point of saying so much? Lan Wuxin was shocked. Old forefather. Yun Yang waved his hand. That's it. Trust me. Jun Moyan stared at him for a moment and suddenly guffawed. If so, come in. The rest of you, stay outside. A sharp glint flashed across his eyes as he enunciated the last three words, do not move. Yun Yang smiled faintly and nodded at Lan Wuxin before he strode forward. The Four Seasons Tower's experts who had followed him were stupefied. Didn't you agree to let us watch from the sidelines? You're going in alone now, without even a word of warning, what do you mean? Then what are we doing following behind you, coming and going all the way? Playing a monkey? We almost had to fight that Jun Moyan, okay? Chapter 419. Lan Wuxin heaved a long sigh of relief. He had finally made it in. There was finally hope. Finally, it was too difficult for him to reach this point. Chancellor Lan was extremely relieved, waiting for old forefather to come out and tell him that he could wait. No, there was still one more hurdle to overcome. Jun Moyan was right here. How could he send someone to search the assassin's soul after this? Would he agree? This was the most important thing right now. Lan Wuxin sighed. It was obvious that the righteousness of the nation could no longer keep Jun Moyan in check. There was only one last way left. His Majesty had to make a move personally. With His Majesty's status, he should be able to succeed. If His Majesty were to make a move personally and be rejected, then Jun Moyan's reputation in the Empire of Zio would be utterly tarnished. Any Zio citizen would despise him. Such an outcome was not what Jun Moyan would like to see and was willing to accept. As for making a move personally, His Majesty should have long been prepared. Wait a minute, I seem to have overlooked something. What have I forgotten? Lan Wuxin frowned, racking his brain. There seemed to be something wrong, but he could not put his finger on it at the moment. The awkward feeling of not being able to put his finger on it made Chancellor Lan panic, as if something bad was about to happen. What was it that made him overlook it? Old forefather had been in there for a long time. Yes, old forefather. Yes. Didn't old forefather say that he knew Jun Moyen? Why did Jun Moyen not feel any sense of familiarity when he saw old forefather now? The way they conversed, it did not seem like they were acquaintances. What was going on? Lan Wuxin suddenly felt flustered. Chancellor Lan thought for a long time and had an answer long ago. There were only two possibilities in the current situation. The first was that old forefather was lying and he did not know Jun Moyen at all. As for the second possibility, old forefather's appearance had changed so drastically that Jun Moyen could not recognize him immediately. He probably didn't recognize me. He definitely didn't recognize me. He must not have recognized me. The poor Prime Minister mumbled vaguely to himself. He seemed to be on the edge of insanity. If something were to go wrong in this matter, not only would he be humiliated, but the entire empire of Zio would also be fooled by others. It was too serious. Absolutely not. If the change was too great, it would cause the acquaintances to not recognize each other. Yes, that must be it, that must be it. Today's Elder Yun was indeed very different from the previous Elder Yun in terms of appearance. He was simply a young man, so it was reasonable that no one could recognize him. Now, Prime Minister Lan could only think along this line of thought. Yun Yang had already entered the small house. Jun Moyen's behavior outside just now made Yun Yang feel that this person was a very reliable and decent person. However, the matter was too important. How could Yun Yang dare to let his guard down? No matter what, Jun Moyen was from Zio after all. He could be kind to old Dugu, but he was the #1 enemy of the Four Empires, a devil whose hands were stained with the blood of the Four Empires' men. It was better not to make too much noise. Jun Moyen's clothes were as white as snow as he followed behind Yun Yang. His long sword had quietly returned to its scabbard. Yun Yang could feel Jun Moyen's gaze piercing into his back, the prickling sensation. It was as if he would be pierced by a long sword with every step he took. "Who are you?" Jun Moyen asked. Yun Yang replied, "I'm just a physician. I'm only here to heal the injured. Why are you so fixated on who I am? What's the benefit to the injured? What's the benefit to you?" Jun Moyen snorted coldly and said, "Rumor has it that an otherworldly expert has come to Zilong City recently. Not only does his cultivation base surpass the heavens, he can even command mystical beasts. He's even worshipped by the physician genius family as their old ancestor. I suppose that's you?" Yun Yang said faintly, "If there's no one else, then it's me." Jun Moyen smiled strangely and said, "It's a pity that you're not Feng Xiang'a." Yun Yang replied, "Oh." Jun Moyen smirked coldly. "You're an imposter in someone else's shell." Yun Yang smiled faintly and said, "Why do you think so? Do you know the god of wine?" Jun Moyen's voice was calm and indifferent. "There's no why. Just because I said so, you're an imposter." Yun Yang smiled faintly. "Since you know I'm an imposter, why didn't you expose me outside?" Jun Moyen smirked coldly and said, "You've gone through so much trouble to sneak into Zilong City. Since you're not Feng Xiang'a, then you must be from there." Yun Yang's heart skipped a beat. A swordsman's theory is too arbitrary. Jun Moyen sighed and said, "Don't panic, I won't expose you. Since they think you're Feng Xiang'a, I can think of you as Feng Xiang'a too. Perhaps you're Feng Xiang'a. Maintaining this status quo is the best situation now." He looked into the room and said rather sadly, "The person inside is my best friend and brother, he's also my savior. I owe him too much in this life, I've let him down too much. Now that the two countries are at war, I can't ignore my position, nor can I erase the country I'm from. No matter how many years I've been wandering outside, I'm still the Zio youth from back then. So he's still lying here now. I have the will and the strength, but I can't save him. This is an immense pressure, an indescribable torture. It's like my conscience has been eaten by a dog during this period of time, it no longer exists. I'm a swordsman. A swordsman who'd rather break than bend, a swordsman who'd never erase his conscience. But my heart now, Jun Moyan heaved a long sigh. Yunyang sighed as well. He could completely understand what Jun Moyan's sigh meant. The heart of a top-notch swordsman should never be flawed, not even the tiniest bit of flaw should exist. Any kind of guilt, regret, or any other negative emotions should not exist. Once it existed, it would affect the clarity of the sword heart and obstruct the future swordsmanship as well. In spite of this, Jun Moyan was obviously stuck between a rock and a hard place. If he were to spare his friend for the sake of friendship, it was a fact that he was born in the empire of Zio, no matter how high his status was in the martial world. Indulging the enemy for personal reasons would make him a traitor. How could the sword heart be clear? On the other hand, if he did not save his friend when he could and watched his friend die or be tortured, it would only make his conscience even more uneasy. How could the sword heart be clear? Therefore, Yunyang/Elder Yun's arrival could really be a chance for Jun Moyan, a chance to resolve this matter perfectly. If it weren't for him, I'd choose to stay out of the war between the two countries and the fight for world domination. Jun Moyan seemed to be confessing something. Such a confession coming from such an unparalleled expert gave Yunyang an extremely absurd sense of incongruity. Therefore, I hope that you can really save him and bring him away safely. Jun Moyan said quietly, I won't help you escape, but I won't stop you either. From the moment you bring him away from here, Jun Moyan will no longer be in Zio. Yunyang said faintly, in the end, I have to rely on my own strength to get out. If I can't, it has nothing to do with you even if your friend and I die in this city. Jun Moyan was silent for a moment before he said, that's right. This is the only benefit I can give you. Yunyang chuckled. Jun Moyan, you're really a very pure swordsman. Two swords almost flew out from Jun Moyan's gaze. Watch your words. Yunyang chuckled and fished out the medallion of gratitude from his interspatial ring. He tossed it over and said faintly, I thought this thing would be of some use, but it's just a fart. You can take it back. This useless thing can only take up space here. Jun Moyan was stunned. You're Yunyang? Yunyang replied brusquely, what Yunyang? This old man is Elder Yun of the physician genius family. Jun Moyan kept the medallion of gratitude quietly and said in a low voice, as long as it doesn't involve the nation and people, I can help you with anything. Yunyang had never been one to hold a grudge. His eyes lit up when he heard the man and said, if so, I do have something to trouble you with. Jun Moyan was speechless. Weren't you acting all high and mighty just now? Didn't you not want to talk to me? Wasn't my medallion of gratitude useless? No. Why did it change so suddenly? What is it? Tell me. As long as it doesn't involve the Empire of Zio, I'll help you complete it. Jun Moyan's medallion of gratitude will not be returned empty-handed. That's great. There are too many people from the Four Seasons Tower out there. Yunyang said, help me kill all these people. This doesn't involve the nation or people, it's just a simple martial world vendetta, isn't it? Jun Moyan felt sick all of a sudden. Why don't I help you conquer the world then? I may not be a match for the Four Seasons Tower's experts out there if I fight them one-on-one, but if I were to fight with my life on the line, Mr. Nian and the other higher-ups will definitely appear. I'll be the one who's done for. I really can't guarantee this. Jun Moyan frowned. At most, I can only help you clean up a batch when I leave. There are only 3 or 4 people I know who are obviously from the Four Seasons Tower. I can't be sure about the rest. Yunyang said indifferently, it doesn't matter. You only need to kill the 3 or 4 people that you can confirm. From then on, our family and you don't owe each other anything. When we meet again, let's not talk about friendship, just our standpoints." Jun Moyan was speechless. "You're blaming me now?" Chapter 420. As Yun Yang walked in, he suddenly thought of a strange question and asked, "After seeing you in person today, I realized that my previous judgment of your ability has been greatly mistaken. Based on my judgment of your cultivation base, you can be considered the pinnacle of the world, perhaps not too far off from Ling Xiaozue, if not even close. How did Bai Yixue manage to escape from your sword back then? With his cultivation base, it would have been impossible for him to take a casual strike from you. How did he manage to escape unscathed after being struck?" This was indeed strange. Before he had met Jun Moyan, Yun Yang had naturally felt that Lao Bai was a peerless expert. However, as Yun Yang's cultivation base grew, especially after meeting Jun Moyan in person, he realized that Lao Bai was nothing. What was more, the previous Lao Bai had not even needed to move his sword against Bai Yixue. Jun Moyan could have chopped the latter into pieces. It was a huge gap between heaven and earth. How could Bai Yixue have been able to fight him for so long and be defeated by a single strike? As for being struck in the chest, that was even more unbelievable. Jun Moyan said coldly, "Those who fight me, as long as they are not evil, I will spare their lives if they are obsessed with the sword." Bai Yixue did not die from the stab that pierced his chest and even managed to escape. Of course, it is because of the sword energy that I injected into his organs when I stabbed him, protecting them so that his vital energy is not depleted. Naturally, he has a chance to escape. Yun Yang was dumbfounded. F***ck, could it be played this way? If you're so capable, why don't you ascend to heaven? Subconsciously, he asked, "Why? Don't you know that nurturing a tiger will only invite calamity? It's your own fault for being devoured by it. I have to nurture him." Jun Moyan was straightforward. "I'm not afraid of being devoured, but I'm afraid that I won't even have an opponent in the future. Bai Yixue can fight with me for dozens of moves without using his mystical qi cultivation base. He's an oddity among swordsmen, worth looking forward to. King pretentious." Yun Yang cursed inwardly. "Where is he?" Yun Yang entered the house and looked around. There was no one there, nor was there any bed or luggage. Jun Moyan said faintly, "I've concealed it with a formation. However, once this formation is opened, it can no longer be restored." Yun Yang took a deep breath and said, "Open it." The tone of this sentence was almost like an order. However, Jun Moyan did not say anything more. With a wave of his hand, a ray of clear light flashed past. The space was warped as if a piece of transparent glass had shattered. Then, a bed appeared out of thin air. Yun Yang looked over and felt an indescribable pain in his heart. Tears gushed out of his eyes almost immediately. He took a deep breath, but the murderous intent and violence within him rose abruptly and could no longer be suppressed. Old Dugu. In Yun Yang's impression, this old man, who had always been hunched and reeking of oil and smoke with an apron tied around his waist, was now lying upright on the bed. His wounds looked like they had been treated, but they were still bloody and scarred. The old man's right leg was gone, and his left leg had been cut countless times, leaving only flesh and skin. His entire body was covered in wounds, and with a rough look, there were at least 1,000 of them. There were saber and sword marks on his face as well. One of his eyes had turned into a hole. His right hand had been chopped off at the elbow, his left hand was relatively intact, but there were still dozens of saber and sword marks on it. His chest was caved in. Who knew how many heavy blows had landed on this old man's body? The old man now looked like a broken rag doll. There was not an inch of uninjured flesh on him. This was the result of Jun Moyan's treatment. How could this be? How could this be? Yun-yang was dazed, his vision darkening as he almost fainted. Before seeing old Dugu in person, he had imagined it many times. He knew that old Dugu must have been severely injured, but he had never imagined that old Dugu's injuries would be so severe and devastating. Just looking at the wounds on his body, it was not difficult to imagine how desperately old Dugu had fought that day. It was a fighting style that had even burned the strength of the soul to the limit. Other than that, the enemies old Dugu had faced had to be at least hundreds of people. Perhaps even more. The old man was lying peacefully now, there was no sign of his chest rising or falling, it was like he had passed away. He's still alive. Jun Moyan's voice was pained. But, it's no different from being dead. His deific consciousness, soul, and will are all gone. The only thing left is the half a breath that I've sent in, barely keeping this broken body together. He can't even be considered breathing. How can he be saved in such a state? He sighed deeply and turned his head away, unable to bear to look at his brother's broken body. Yun-yang placed his hand on old Dugu's neck. It was only here that he could feel the old man's body still warm, and he could also feel the signs of a heartbeat after a long time. I've used countless spiritual medicines during this period of time, but the only effect was to keep him alive for this half a breath. That's all. Jun Moyan said dejectedly, sometimes, I really want to kill him with a swing of my sword. I want him to die a quick death and leave this cruel world. But he clearly has an unfulfilled wish. His will to live is still there, he's been holding on. Instead of saying that I've helped him fight for that last breath, it's more like he's not giving up and persevering, otherwise, even if old Dugu had fallen into the enemy's hands, he would still have the ability to end his own life. He wouldn't have waited until now. His dignity wouldn't allow him to live so pathetically, therefore, I've used a formation to seal off this space completely. Only by doing so can old Dugu's soul not completely dissipate. Jun Moyan murmured. Yun-yang sucked in a deep breath. At this moment, he really had the urge to kill all of the Empire of Zio's citizens. It was too cruel. Too cruel. Old Dugu's cultivation base can be considered a top-notch expert in the Tianxian continent. At the very least, he should be in the heaven realm. Yun-yang heard his own voice speaking, it was monotonous and emotionless. How could he be ganged up and beaten up like this with such strength? There must be some other reason behind this. Jun Moyan kept quiet for a bit and said, when I saw him earlier, I felt the medicinal power of the immortal's odium on him. It should be the drug's doing. Poisoned. Yun-yang pressed his lips together, his gaze chilling. With old Dugu's martial world experience and cautiousness, it can't be a coincidence that he was poisoned this time. An experienced martial artist like him, one who's here for assassination and revenge, should be cautious at every step. How could he be poisoned so easily? I believe that Senior Jun is also aware of this. Jun Moyan kept quiet for a long time and said, I do know. It said that he was poisoned by Ouyang Xiaoxi. His whereabouts were also leaked by Ouyang Xiaoxi. Yun-yang clenched his fists and asked quietly, Ouyang Xiaoxi? Why would he do such a thing? Dugu Jima and Ouyang Xiaoxi were renowned assassins back in the day. This time, after Dugu Jima arrived at Zilong City, I don't know what happened, but both of them got in touch and agreed to work together. Then, this is what happened, Jun Moyan said. Then, what about Ouyang Xiaoxi? A ball of fire burned in Yun-yang's eyes. I don't know his whereabouts and I don't know the whole story. Jun Moyan said, what I know is that he betrayed old Dugu and poisoned him. After that, this person disappeared without a trace. I had planned to look for Ouyang Xiaoxi at the ends of the earth after the matter here is settled. I'd like to end this grudge for old Dugu. Jun Moyan said. No need. Please spare Ouyang Xiaoxi's life. Yunyang said coldly, old Dugu still has his kin in this world. There's no need for an outsider to avenge this grudge. Jun Moyan was silent for a moment before he said, very well. He looked at Yunyang in slight shock. The murderous aura that Yunyang was exuding now was enough to terrify even an expert like Jun Moyan. I'm going to start healing old Dugu. I need absolute peace and quiet during this period of time. Yunyang closed his eyes and said quietly, no matter what, Jun Moyan, I still have to thank you for saving old Dugu's last breath. Otherwise, it would have been a hopeless situation. Jun Moyan sighed. Just as he was about to speak, he realized that Yunyang had already closed his eyes and was beginning to pour out his spiritual energy to heal old Dugu's body. Jun Moyan stood speechlessly for a moment before he turned to the door. His gaze was weak and bleak as he looked at the bleak winter scenery outside. Yunyang's words of thanks and acknowledgement had returned to his sword heart. He had done his part after all. However, for some reason, he felt waves of coldness assaulting his heart. It was a bone-piercing chill, a coldness that could freeze one's heart. He knew that from this moment onwards, the last tie he had in this world had disappeared. From this moment onwards, his life was only his sword. However, he did not know why he felt an inexplicable sense of loneliness when he had finally reached this realm, despite always pursuing this realm. Loneliness. How lonely, Jun Moyan heaved a sigh dejectedly. He could feel that his last friend was also leaving him. Chapter 421. Yunyang closed the door, shutting Jun Moyan outside. Then, he reached out to hold old Dugu's arm. His right arm. The only part of his body that could be held was this half of his arm. Although his left arm looked more complete than his right, the bones within were actually shattered. It could still be maintained with the support of mystical chi, but now that old Dugu was unconscious and his cultivation base was gone, it might break apart if he moved his left arm recklessly. It would be a real challenge to repair it then. As for the other parts of his body, they were mostly broken. No matter how hardened one was, one would not be able to bear to look at it. Yunyang was overwhelmed with grief at this moment. He could no longer hold it in as tears gushed out of his eyes. The iron-blooded man was actually shedding tears. He was extremely heartbroken and furious at the same time. His body was trembling uncontrollably. The moment he saw old Dugu, Yunyang knew that old Dugu was, in fact, a dead man. Even though there was still a breath of air left, it was actually old Dugu's strong will to live. He was unwilling to give up and was barely holding on. It was obvious that he did not want to die, or perhaps, he still had unfulfilled wishes. However, in order to deal with the enemy's soul-searching technique, he had shattered his own soul. His soul could no longer be restored, his deific consciousness disintegrated. Even if he breathed normally, he was only a walking corpse. There was no thought, no soul, no consciousness. Father, I'm here, I'm here. Yunyang called out in his heart, can you feel it? Your other son is here. Old Dugu lay there, motionless and unresponsive to Yunyang's arrival. Emmy. Emmy. Yunyang called out anxiously in his heart, quick, take a look. Can he still be saved? Emmy's consciousness peeked out. The green glow had just lingered on old Dugu's body when it shrunk back in shock. Emmy was a ruthless character that had been through a lot. Strictly speaking, its knowledge was far above its owner, Yunyang's, but it had never seen such a severely injured body. Under Yunyang's constant urging, Emmy extended its consciousness again and examined the body for a long time before shaking its head helplessly. Emmy already knew how important this person was to Yunyang, but it still uttered, Aya. Yunyang was saddened. Is there no hope? The green leaves drooped down. Can you try to gather its divine soul? Even if it's only for a moment? Yunyang said softly, I know that my father has been holding on and not leaving because he has something on his mind. He's waiting for me. I want to give you a chance to speak your mind. He has been holding on, waiting for me to come. He must have a lot of things to tell me, and he must have a lot of things for me to do. Emmy, I'm not asking for much. I just want my father to know that I'm by his side, that he won't be alone when he dies, that he won't be alone, that he has a son to send him off. That's enough. Yunyang said softly. Emmy was reluctant. Emmy expressed solemnly that it was feasible to do so, but it would consume too much energy. Most importantly, it could not save the person at all, it could only form a final radiance of the setting sun. It was not worth it, it was futile, and the loss outweighed the gain. Cut the nonsense, do it quickly. Yunyang urged in an unprecedentedly stern tone for the first time. His voice was resolute and brooked no question. Faced with its master's decision, no matter how reluctant Emmy was, it knew that it had to do it this time. It could only unleash its full strength to create the opportunity for old Dugu's final radiance. Waves of abnormally exuberant green life force burst forth with an indescribable vigor and flowed endlessly into old Dugu's body, meridians, blood, dantian, mind, and sea of consciousness. At the same time, Emmy was still emitting an extraordinarily radiant purple glow that intersected in the room, as if it was binding something in the air. This time, not a single bit of the air of vitality that Emmy had released leaked out. Wisps of it entered old Dugu's injured body. Gradually, the green formed something that looked like a cocoon outside old Dugu's body. A green cocoon. Such an immense amount of air of vitality would be enough to revive someone else 100 times over, but it did not have the slightest effect when it was injected into old Dugu's body. In spite of this, Emmy continued to pour out the air of vitality, obviously anticipating this situation. After all, old Dugu's condition was much worse than an ordinary person who had just died. How could it be easy to revive a dying person? Yunyang could not help but tremble softly. Poor father. In the invisible void, old Dugu's dispersed soul was reassembling itself bit by bit due to Emmy's relentless efforts. His broken body was recovering bit by bit as well. However, this was as far as it went. No matter how much air of vitality was injected, it was no longer effective, instead seeping out from various parts of his broken body. Obviously, his broken body could no longer bear more air of vitality, nor could it unleash the energy. From the beginning to the end, the wounds showed no signs of healing. As for regeneration, it was even more impossible. Yunyang shuddered in sorrow. Before this, Yunyang was still holding on to a sliver of hope. With the heaven-defying life force provided by Emmy and old Dugu's indestructible will to live, he might be able to create a new life, escape death and prolong life. However, everything that was happening before his eyes was a clear indication that there was no longer any hope of defying fate. If old Dugu's body could continue to absorb the air of vitality to nourish itself, then there would be a chance of survival. Now, however, his body was completely indifferent to such an abundant life force. It was the last ray of hope that had been severed. Emmy, who had tried with all its might, finally stopped the infusion of air of vitality. Instead, it released another type of purple ray in a more concentrated manner. Yunyang could only hear his own heartbeat clearly. He waited anxiously, watching without blinking, afraid that he would miss the tiny chance to meet old Dugu again. After a long, long time, Yunyang finally felt an unusual vibration in the space. It was Emmy using the purple ray, trying its best to retrieve it. It had even infused air of vitality that was so dense that it was almost tangible into the purple ray to increase its pulling force. As far as the eye could see, a purple net appeared in mid-air. Ayaya! Emmy cried out laboriously. Obviously, this task was very exhausting for Emmy as well, it could not be sustained for long. Yunyang was not in the mood to pay attention to his subconscious space. If he had been paying attention, he would have seen that the space was already raging like a storm. At the top of the space of consciousness, the vague image of a human face gradually appeared. It was the soul of the target that Emmy had restored based on Yun Yang's memory, mobilizing all the energy it could muster. Only by retrieving the portion of the soul that had dissipated from the void and helping it form a complete consciousness once again could the soul be truly revived. Yun Yang, the hands-off boss, was only responsible for giving the order. How could he know how much calculation and energy was required for this to happen? Even if Yun Yang knew, he would still do it without hesitation. Regardless of the cost. He wanted to meet old Dugu again. Emmy's cries were getting more and more strained, it was obvious that it was running out of energy. However, Yun Yang's eyes shone abruptly. A blurry silhouette gradually appeared in the void before Yun Yang's eyes. It was the silhouette of an old man with a hunched back. An old man with a face full of wrinkles and an apron tied around his waist, but his gaze was gentle. His kind gaze was focused somewhere in the void, as if he was looking at his 9 sons from afar with benevolence. In that small and narrow restaurant, in that place that only belonged to him, each one of them was eating Chinese cabbage and tofu contentedly. His gaze was filled with contentment and happiness. Father. Yun Yang's eyes were brimming with tears, his body trembling violently. He had always prided himself on being calm and unmoving like a mountain, but right now, he had the urge to burst into tears, disregarding everything else. I'm here to bring you home. As Yun Yang's voice echoed, the silhouette in the air suddenly swayed, like a human figure twisting in ripples on the surface of water. However, there was no change in its expression. It was obvious that Emmy had not completed the final stage. Amidst Yun Yang's teary anticipation, the hunched silhouette in the air actually moved. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.